Hello everyone. I am the Midnight Narrator and I am here today to help you. I know you are using this video to fall asleep, so before we begin, give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Write in the comments where you're from and what time you're watching this. Now get comfortable and relax. This story takes place in November of 2022. At the time, I drew a special elk tag in the Beaverhead mountain range of central East Idaho. I had hunted in this area many times before over the years, and I know the area like the back of my hand. It became a place of comfort and good memories. It still is, but I haven't looked at it the same since the story I am about to tell. I planned a week-long trip for the first week of November and took one of my best friends with me. We spent the first 4 days hiking up and down various ridges, chasing elk and having a blast. The nights were spent storytelling and eating soup by the stove. Mind you, it was November in Idaho, so it was very cold. It was the 4th night of the trip. It had snowed during the day, and a fresh layer of snow lay on the ground. The sky had since cleared up, and a very cold but still and quiet air had settled in. My friend and I had gotten into a deep discussion about the Bible, spirits, cryptids, skinwalkers, etc. I should note that my friend had at the time been experiencing a decline in his mental health, and it was not uncommon for him to sometimes behave erratically. This will be relevant later in the story. During this conversation, I felt an intense fear kind of settle on me. It almost felt like the air had become tense. I had the urge to change the discussion into something else, but that's when it happened. Within 20 or 30 yards of the tent, what I thought at first was a coyote began yipping and barking very, very loudly. I looked at my friend, who became excited and told me to grab my gun so we could go look for this thing. It was strange, though, and something didn't feel right. The animal, whatever it was, didn't exactly sound like a coyote. It almost shrieked as opposed to yipping the way coyotes do, and it would occasionally bark and at times almost scream. I'm also an experienced outdoorsman, and any other hunter knows a coyote would not approach a tent in the middle of nowhere and draw attention to itself. It would continue to vocalize for about 3 to 5 minutes at a time, circling the tent from a distance. I reluctantly grabbed my rifle and my spotlight, very bright, intense flashlight, and started looking for this thing. As I stepped about 10 yards away from the tent, I heard it again directly in front of me, shrieking, barking, etc. I shined my light directly at it. I could see probably 150 to 200 yards in front of me, yet nothing was there. No eyes shining in the light, no outline of an animal or person, nothing. After repeating this same scenario 3 or 4 times, we gave up and went back in the tent to warm up. But the sound wouldn't stop. At one point, when it went silent, my friend poked his head out of the tent and yelled, "Hey, shut up!" He was immediately answered with a scream from the animal. At times, it sounded like it came from above the tent in the tree we were camped under. I tried playing it off as a coyote or maybe a hunting dog that got lost, but I could not convince myself it was either of those, and we ignored it for the rest of the time. It slowly started going further and further away from the tent until it finally stopped about an hour or so later. The next morning I looked around the area for tracks, yet to my surprise I found nothing but our own. We didn't talk about it for the rest of the trip, and a few days later we went home. Now I don't know if it is at all related, but about 3 months after this, my friend had a complete mental breakdown, and has since never been on a hunting trip. Some in his family, a deeply religious family, questioned whether he was victim of some spiritual attack or something of that nature. I didn't correlate the two at the time, but in hindsight I have so many questions about that night. Is it a coincidence whatever that animal was appeared during that particular conversation? Could it have actually been a coyote or wolf? Why couldn't I see any eyes gleaming with the flashlight? Did this incident have something to do with my friend's mental decline? My friend would sometimes tell me and others about strange things he saw or heard. Was this related? If anyone has anything to point out, please share. By the front kitchen door sits a shotgun, and every morning, rain or shine, I take it for a walk. I'll leave the house and check on the chickens, counting them to make sure one of them hasn't been stolen in the night by Harry. Then I'll walk through the barn. Sometimes, if I'm feeling nice, I'll bring Hephaestus a carrot. The horse's good morning is rarely more than a snort. After I know all the farm animals made it through the night, I'll go back to the front of the house and stand on the porch. I'll double-check that the shotgun is loaded, and I'll wait. For 10 minutes I'll stand and watch the winding dirt road that leads up to the farmhouse. I know exactly what I'm waiting for, and I hope it never comes. I live alone here, and I haven't paid a cent on this farmhouse since I became the sole owner. It's never had a mortgage, and even if it did, I would have long outlived it. But in some county courtroom somewhere, loads of unpaid property tax has to be piling up. One day I know someone who wants to take this place away from me will come walking up my road, and I'll have to kill them. Before I start to sound like a psychopath hell-bent on tasting the blood of the innocent, it's not something I want to do, not by any means. But when that day comes, I'll have to. This place is all I have left. If I don't see anyone, I'll go feed the animals. Then I'll head back inside, kick off my boots, and start on breakfast. It's usually bacon and eggs unless the landlady brings me some of those cereal bars at the end of the month. Then I make sure I leave a plate on the table for Aunt Jean, even though I never see her eat it. This morning was different, because I didn't make it past the chickens. The coop has been in my yard for as long as I can remember, and inside are always at least 7 hens and sometimes a few chicks. The hens themselves change because it's hard to keep Harry from stealing them in the night. Really, it's almost impossible to prevent any of the many disasters that may befall a chicken on this farm. But boy, do I keep trying. My routine count that day only gave me 6 hens and 3 chicks. Immediately I could tell who was missing. The girls were fluttering and fussing in a way they definitely wouldn't have been if their matriarch was around. Beelzebub, a mean old bitch missing an eye and my favorite by far, was nowhere to be found. I tried not to panic and immediately failed. Without her, there was a chicken power vacuum. Chicken society would fall apart. Pretty soon I'd be hearing things like power to the poultry and peck the establishment. I couldn't think about my routine anymore. I had to find her. The barn was quiet and all the other animals were in their rightful place except Sally. That silly old goat was on the ceiling again. That's right, she likes to hang on the ceiling, not the roof, don't ask. But it felt wrong to ruin her fun. Let her stick it to old man Gravity if she wanted to. Hephaestus decided that he could show off just as well and sneezed all over me. It wasn't the first time I'd have to wash horse snot out of my pajamas, and it wouldn't be the last. Well then, good morning, Hef. Have you seen Beelzebub anywhere? He gave me a snort that said even if he knew he wouldn't tell me. Not even for a carrot. Fuck you too then. You're 2 weeks and a fart in the wrong direction away from being glue. He whinnied at me, but I wasn't listening to his sass anymore. I searched high and low in the barn, but to no avail. If Harry took my favorite chicken, I was going to take his favorite limb. I made a mental checklist of all the places I needed to look, and then I started making my way down it. I started with checking the coop again, just in case the hens were practicing common stage magic like last time. Then I did a good sweep of the roof of the farmhouse. Next, I walked along the tree line as close as I dared, and then I checked the well. Hey Anna, do you happen to have Beelzebub down there? As usual, Anna Well's only response was to scream up at me. Anna Well showed up not long after my mom left, and she's been an endearing sort of nuisance ever since. She doesn't always scream nothing. Sometimes it's song lyrics, sometimes it's poetry. One time I even heard her shouting the quadratic formula. I've never seen her, but I sure have heard her. I'm going to take that as a no, thanks anyway. Next, I went around to the front of the house and took a look underneath. Then I remembered that there are bad things under the house and I should never look under there again. Aunt Jean watched me from the window. Maybe she would know where Beelzebub went. I ran into the house and found Aunt Jean in her upstairs room like usual, which was weird considering she was at the downstairs window only a minute or 2 ago. Hey Aunt Jean, have you seen Beelzebub anywhere? She just sat in her rocking chair and smiled at me. Oh wow, you've got some extra teeth today, don't you, Aunt Jean? She smiled at me wider and rocked back and forth. The creaking always made me a little drowsy. Laying in the dark and listening to it from the next room worked wonders on the nights I had trouble falling asleep. Looks good on you. If you happen to see bees, could you let me know? If Aunt Jean had spoken, I imagined her telling something about how chickens were nature's troublemakers, but that I'd find her. As I turned to leave, I hoped she was right. I spent the whole day searching high and low. I checked every place a chicken could feasibly be. I scoured the attic, the storm cellar, the refrigerator, even under all the beds. She wasn't in my truck or sitting in the perpetual warm spot on my four-wheeler. She wasn't in the shower or out on either of the balconies. I had a solid feeling about the crank washing machine, but no luck. Not even an inch of the house and the land it was on was left unseen. I didn't even stop to eat. By the time the sun was sinking, there was only one place that she could be that I hadn't checked: the cornfields. I have a few issues with the cornfields, which is an interesting dilemma to have when you're a corn farmer. For one, the dust during the hotter months turned them into allergy city. There's also a lot of corn spiders, not that I have a huge problem with them. They're not very mean and honestly fascinating, but once they start trying to climb on me, then all bets are off. Especially the ones I find every so often that are about baseball-sized. But the biggest problem is the pigman. Deep in the cornfield closest to my house, from sunset until just before sunrise, he stands and watches. He's tall, with tan skin turned rotted gray in places. His arms and legs are as thick as oak branches, and he leaves bloody bare footprints in between the rows. In his dead hand he holds an iron slaughter hammer. It's still stained with old blood, just like the tattered overalls he wears. I call him the pigman because instead of the type of head any decent, good-natured zombie would have, he has the head of a pig. Not like his face is piggish, but it's as if someone stuffed a pig's head onto a human's. One of these days I know he'll come out of that cornfield. I know he'll come for me, and that scares me more than I'd like to admit. There's no one else here to miss me besides the animals. I crept out to the edge of the stalks. He turned to face the intruder of his domain, locking those oily black eyes on me. I returned his accusing stare. "You took my fucking chicken, didn't you?" There was no telltale clucking from within the field, but I couldn't be sure he didn't stuff Beelzebub into a weird porcine pocket dimension or something. The pigman just stared at me. "Give her back." Nothing. Not even a twitch. "Please?" The pigman tilted his head back and let out a warped squeal that made me just a little nauseous. "Fine. Keep her. See if I give a damn." I turned and went back to the house. I had a few other courses of action I could take, calling the nearest neighbors, but it was doubtful she would have wandered onto someone else's property. Hopping on my four-wheeler and searching farther out, but venturing away too far after dark had come with some interesting consequences last time. Making a missing persons poster a missing chickens poster. I went with the last option, doing my best to capture Beelzebub's likeness with my terrible drawing skills. Once I had put as much information as I could about her on there, I took a quick ride to the end of my road and stapled it to the power pole. That was all that could be done about it until tomorrow. The only thing that had been fed that day was the animals, and I was starting to feel dizzy. I'd planned on cooking the trout I'd gotten from the last time the landlady visited, but the most I could manage was heating up leftovers. Aunt Jean ate the microwaved pork roast I left out for her just the same. Usually I could find something to occupy my time before bed. Despite the time-consuming job of being a farmer, I had a few hobbies. Several of them weren't actually dangerous and didn't involve hay. On a clear night like this, the best place to be was reading on the rickety little balcony I have to climb out of my window to get on. But I was too exhausted and miserable. At that point, I just wanted to go to sleep and forget that I existed for the next 6 hours, or at least some time to lay down and stare at the ceiling. After showering, I slipped into bed. It was a hot night, and the air conditioning had been on the fritz for the past week. I knew the landlady would come and take care of it within the next day or two, but until then I was sleeping in little more than a pair of boxers. I used to have an admittedly unwise habit of sleeping in my binder until it went missing. It only reappeared when I agreed out loud to whatever might be listening that I'd take it off to sleep. I had a sneaking suspicion the thief might have been Aunt Jean, but I couldn't say for sure. I don't remember when I fell asleep, but I knew when I woke up. Worse, I knew why I woke up. Someone was bumblefucking around the chicken coop, and I had a pretty good guess as to who. I took the stairs down 2 at a time, not stopping for anything except my shotgun. Before I felt my feet leave the porch, I was already around the back at the chicken coop. Just like I expected, Harry somehow already had a chicken out of it. This is as good of a time as any to talk a little bit about Harry Houdini. I could name at least 4 variations of Bigfoot in the southeast off the top of my head, but Harry is not one of them. All those people that believe the legendary ape man is just a misidentified bear. Harry would be their wet nightmare. Standing at a little over 8 feet tall, the bear man has opposable thumbs, a wicked temper, and walks around like a person on a casual stroll. He earned his nickname because almost every other night he comes and tries to steal a hen. I jerry-rigged that door good in the hopes to keep predators out and the chickens in, and it worked, all except for Harry. There's no way he should be able to get in there, and yet... "Freeze! Drop that hen!" Harry opened his big, slobbery, flesh-covered snout and let out a roar. His blue human eyes glowed in the darkness, and I stared him down and roared right back. Then I fired a warning shot. Next one goes right through your weird bare hand. See if you can nab a chicken then. Harry roared again, stomping his massive feet like a child who couldn't have the candy they wanted. Then he dropped the hen and ran back off into the forest, swinging his arms like a jogger. I picked up the hen and was disappointed to find that it was not Beelzebub. It was just Henley, the newest addition to the flock. She clucked in what I assume was either gratitude or annoyance as I stuffed her back into the coop. I did another half-hearted search around the perimeter of the house. Then the night breeze picked up to a steady wind and brought clouds and the promise of an early morning rainstorm. Figuring Harry wouldn't be back for the rest of the night at least, and Beelzebub was a lost cause by now, I went back to bed. If I had remembered what it felt like to not feel lonely, I would have felt lonely then. Except I didn't exactly get back to bed. I made it about 2 steps into the kitchen before I noticed another chicken, standing in the doorway to the living room. There were 3 things that were different about this one, though. Number 1, it had black feathers, which none of my chickens did. It was definitely not mine. 2, it had bright red eyes, like someone had stuck burning coals into its face. And 3, it came up to about chest height. I tried to come up with something profound to say to my unwanted guest, but all I could get out was a confused, "What?" The mega chicken's beak dropped open, and instead of the squawks I was used to first thing in the morning, it let out a wheeze like an old woman taking her last breath. I'd heard some pretty weird chicken noises in my time, but that wasn't one of them. "Look, I don't know what you are or what you're doing here, but it's time to go, buddy. It's not far enough in the AM for this shit. Pack it up." I guess the guy wasn't a big fan of the attitude. It charged across the kitchen at me and headbutted me to the floor with surprising strength. I dealt with a lot of weird shit on this farm, but this was pushing it. And don't get me wrong, I was scared. My heart was pounding and my hands were ice cold, but the annoyance was way more pressing. I just wanted to go back to sleep. The mega chicken stabbed a talon down, and I rolled under it just in time. Well, almost. I felt a wicked burning in my side and the upswell of blood from the new scratches on my hip. I didn't waste time leaping up and running right back out the kitchen door. Mega Chicken followed after me, screaming something like, "Ruin and rot are all you've got, and rolling stones will break your bones." Giant evil chicken who spoke in rhymes. Great. I wasn't about to try and make any sense of it. If this thing had taken bees, I had a snowball's chance in hell of ever seeing her again. I stumbled on the uneven ground of the dirt road and went down hard when my ankle buckled. The mega chicken fell on me in a flurry of feathers, and its neck swiveled all the way around like the exorcist. Then it kept going, corkscrewing like it was made of taffy until it had gained at least 4 extra feet. Maybe I should have been begging for my life, but all I could think was just how stupid it was going to be to die like this. Mega Chicken wrapped the talon that still had my blood on it around my head and began to squeeze. Just when I thought this was lights out for me, there was a whistle in the air. Then a silver arrow pierced through the chicken's head. It let out a raspy groan, then fell limp on top of me. Slimy, acrid blood dribbled out onto my face, and I tried my best not to puke. With all my might, I pushed it off and stood just in time to see a figure with glowing eyes in the distance, armed with a drawn bow made of dark wood. It was the second time since living here that I'd seen the landlady. In mere moments, she'd disappeared with a swish of her cloak. I didn't even have time to thank her. With her gone, it was just me, the moon, and the giant chicken corpse. I decided that it was a problem for tomorrow and started walking back to the house. I passed out face down on my bed as soon as I was close enough to make a crash landing. Save for the vague bubbling sensation of hydrogen peroxide on my hip, I was dead to the world. I overslept my alarm the next morning by about 20 minutes and woke up to a gentle shake on my shoulder. Aunt Jean was standing right above my bed, smiling. She had fewer teeth than usual today. She had no teeth at all, in fact. Her mouth was just a black void. "Oh, sorry, Aunt Jean. Harry got into the coop again last night. Then there was this chicken god thing. Then the landlady dropped by and I had trouble getting back to sleep." She just watched me with that strange smile that old ladies often have. I reached down and touched my tender side, feeling the bandages there. The dried blood was washed off my face, too. That could have only been her doing. "Just give me a little time. I'll have breakfast ready within the hour, I promise." If Aunt Jean had ever spoken, I could have imagined her saying something like, "Don't rush on my account, chickadee." Then she walked backward out of the room, her wide eyes never leaving me. I jumped up, threw on my boots and a shirt, and did my usual rounds. There was still no sign of Beelzebub or the KFC value meal that had died all over me last night, and I'd done all but given up entirely. As I stood on the porch and watched the dirt road, I finally let myself cry about it. I couldn't cry for every chicken. I lose them frequently enough and life has to go on. But Beelzebub was special. She'd been with me the longest and I loved her honesty about life. She'd never met a hand she couldn't peck. I wiped furiously at my eyes, hoping fate wouldn't choose this day to come. There was no doubt my aim would be off. I waited an extra few minutes before heading back inside to start breakfast. I just poked my head into the fridge when there was a knock at the front door. The sound of it made me jump. I couldn't remember the last time I'd actually heard someone knocking. The idea of another person on the farm was scarier than anything else that lived out here combined. Other people were always bad news. Other people always brought problems. I crept to the door, shotgun gripped tight in my shaking hands. I pressed my ear to the wood for a moment, heard nothing, then whipped it open. If someone had been there, they were gone now. But there was something left behind. A large brown package sat on the front doormat, with small holes poked messily around the tape sealing it closed. The mailbox at the end of my long road was leaning on the dead-end sign and was home to a rather impressive wasp's nest. I hadn't gotten so much as a scrap of junk mail in years. The last time I'd ever received anything was a small package on my 16th birthday. Inside was a silver Zippo that was always in my pocket from then on, and an unexpected letter from someone I hadn't heard from in a long time. The label for the box sitting on my porch had no return address and was covered in way too many stamps. The sending address simply said, "To Portia Hadley." Portia was scribbled out with a clearly dying Sharpie, and Newport was written in big blue letters. I didn't know who this mystery delivery man was, nor did I necessarily want to know. But at least they had the decency not to dead-name me. That's more consideration than I get from most of the people in town. I sat down my gun and took the package inside, splitting open the tape with a few good tugs. There was a flutter of feathers, and then Beelzebub looked up at me and clucked. "Oh my God, Beezy." As I dropped the box, the wrinkled old prune jumped into my arms. She looked no worse for wear, except for the extra eye right above where her left one used to be. But I wasn't about to fault her for a little accidental mutation in transit. She was alive and pecking, and that was good enough. "Where have you been, girl?" "Not that I was worried at all. I knew you'd make it back here. You're a tough old gal." She just fluttered her wings and crooned loudly. I could only assume this was a what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas type of deal. "Well, you're just in time for breakfast. Come on." Instead of the usual bacon and eggs, I made fruit salad that morning. For the first time in a long while, I had a guest at the table. Beelzebub sat on the stack of old phone books and pecked at her apples and strawberries. I left out a plate for Aunt Jean, too, knowing at some point I would blink and the plate would be empty. "You're a real devil for going missing like that, you know, Bees?" She squawked, which I took to be a long diatribe about how a name can innately change a person, and I gave her the identity she has now. But she was a chicken, so of course it devolved into her talking about seed. Yeah, you're probably right about that one. The rain that had been on its way all morning finally broke out over the fields. It was going to be a long, muddy day. That's all the story I have to tell for now. Sure, I could probably think of something else, but the shitty old desktop computer I have likes to type maybe 2 words a minute. And that's when it's not overheating. In retrospect, I realize I should have clarified about Aunt Jean. She's not actually my aunt. I really don't know who or what she is. Every so often I forget she's even there, and that's why sometimes I say I live alone. Most of the time it feels like I do. But Aunt Jean is always around somewhere. Aunt Jean has been existing here for about 3 years, and in all that time I've never heard her say a single word. I don't know if she's mute or if she just prefers to smile all day. But what I do know is she's been nothing but kind to me since the day she arrived. She may be a bit weird, but there are much stranger things out there. It all happened one night not too long after my 17th birthday. I was feeding my 2 pigs when a deafening crack followed by an even louder boom echoed out from somewhere in the distance. I hadn't bought my 4-wheeler yet, and the truck had come down with a horrible case of radiator diarrhea last week, so I saddled up Hephaestus and went to check it out. He was annoyed at being disturbed from his nap, but I gave him an apple, and he got over it quick enough. It wasn't the wisest thing to leave the farmstead after dark, but I was worried someone could have gotten maimed or killed. The last thing I needed was the blues swarming around out here in the sticks, suspecting me of crimes I didn't commit. Also, the whole morality thing. The closer we got to where the sound had come from, the more spooked Hephaestus became. "Come on, you old coot," I said, nudging the heels of my boots into his sides. He trotted forward reluctantly, and that was when I saw what had caused the noise. If you were to drive past the offshoot that is my road, eventually one side of the forest opens up. A line of lonely high-voltage transmission towers runs along the clearing, like soldiers lined up for battle. My money is on them being connected to a secret government laboratory. 2 of them had been knocked down and were laying in a twisted pile, making concerning zips and pops. I hoped they didn't start a fire because there was no way I had enough salt to fix that. It was the weirdest thing I'd seen all week, but it was shortly about to be dethroned. What in the sheep-fucking hell? I jumped off of Hephaestus's back to get a closer look, but he immediately moved in front of me and lowered his head. The last time Hephaestus had made a stance like this was when we got caught by a black bear while I was taking him for a little stroll. The bear would have sooner turned neon purple than have been scared of the old wheezy bastard. But it ran off regardless. He raked his hoof along the ground and snorted like a poor excuse for a bull. I scrambled for his saddlebag and pulled out my maglite. "What is it, boy? What do you see?" The smell hit me first. I turned on the light and shined it in the direction he was looking, clutching my nose, and noticed 2 things. The first was that the ground around the downed towers was soaked in blood. I don't mean that an animal was mauled there or something, and blood was splattered around. The entire ground was saturated with blood. There wasn't a speck of green to be found as far as I could see. It looked like it was a Titan's time of the month or something. I could tell it wasn't exactly fresh, and I didn't know if that made me feel better or worse. Decaying blood has a certain smell, and I wish there was a stronger word than vomit-worthy to use here, but let's go with that. The second thing I noticed, crouched by the side of the road, was an old woman. She wore a dress straight out of a prairie western, and her silver-white hair was pulled loosely back. Small dots of soot stained her owl lens glasses, and despite being out here all alone in the near dead of night, by 2 downed electrical lines she was all smiles. Despite the mess, there wasn't even the tiniest pinprick of red anywhere on her. "Ma'am, what are you doing out here? Do you need help? Do you, know where all that blood came from?" I spoke to her as gently as I could through my held nose. There was no answer, so I began slowly walking over. Hephaestus tried to nudge me away, but I gently pushed him aside. If things went south, there was a reason I'd slung my shotgun over my back right before I left. I offered out my hand, and she stared at it for a minute before taking it and letting me help her to her feet. I couldn't be sure that all that blood was her responsibility. It wouldn't have been the strangest coincidence I'd seen, and I wasn't about to leave her alone out here in the dark. "Where's your family? Where did you come from?" I had to consider the possibility that this was some poor woman with old age confusion that had wandered out into the night. But what could I do? Would anyone even look at a missing grandma poster? I knew most of the old ladies in town, and I'd never seen this woman before. "What's your name?" "Nothing." She just stared at me and kept right on smiling. "Okay, well then I'm going to find something to call you. I don't want to call you grandma because you're not my grandma. That's non-consensual grandmothering." As I walked back toward Hephaestus with her, he whinnied in protest and clopped backward. "Oh, come on, Hef, it's just a little old lady. She's not going to hurt you." Hephaestus reluctantly moved forward again, and I carefully grabbed his reins. "How about Aunt something. Aunt Jean?" For the first time, she gave me something different than a smile. She looked thoughtful before nodding once. Then she returned to her favorite pastime, which, as far as I could tell, was creepy smiling. "Hey, we all have our hobbies. Hephaestus, Aunt Jean is our guest for the night, and if you buck her off, I'm going to be very mad at you, so stay still." Before I could so much as touch his saddle, Aunt Jean was already on his back. But that's not totally right. She was standing on his back. Hephaestus was, unsurprisingly, not a big fan of this. He neighed loudly and threw both legs back in a swift kick that could have decapitated a moose. I'd only been on the receiving end of one of those kicks once, and it had ended with a broken leg and a kaleidoscope of bruises that took months to fade. Despite his attempt to get her off, Aunt Jean didn't so much as wobble. I watched in silent amazement as she lifted one leg and settled into a yoga pose. "You're one nifty nonagenarian, aren't you?" She winked at me, and I decided that maybe it wouldn't be so horrible to have her around for the night. Once Hephaestus had been soothed and bribed with another apple from his saddlebag, I climbed on and booked it back to the house. Something about staying there for another second felt wrong. Like whatever had put all that blood there was watching and waiting for the right time to add more. Aunt Jean didn't so much as waver from her place on his back the whole way there. Either she'd escaped from the world's best acrobat troupe, or she wasn't entirely human. I didn't have much of a problem with either. Of course, as soon as I made it back to the house and let Hephaestus resume his nap, I did the sensible thing and called the police. I didn't want to, and it went exactly about how I expected it to. "Hello, you've reached the Battleman Police Department. How may I help you?" The man on the other spoke in a gruff, no-nonsense tone. This was already going swimmingly. Hi, I'm calling to report a missing person, or I think a found person would be a better word." The man on the other end paused. "You want to report a found person? Do you have a name?" "She won't actually talk to me. I don't think she talks at all. I found her out by the side of the road near Silver's Curve. There were some downed lines nearby and a lot of blood. She might have wandered off from somewhere. She's really old and there's got to be some kind of family out looking for her." "Did you say Silver's Curve?" I bit my lip and braced myself for what was coming next. "Yes, I live down the dead-end road just past Silver's Curve. Sorry, our jurisdiction doesn't go that far." "Whose jurisdiction is it then?" The voice on the other end actually laughed. They were getting bolder. "I don't know, and even if I did, I wouldn't tell you, weirdo." Of course, he used a much less nice word than weirdo. But I hung up on him before he could finish his insult to my identity. I pulled the phone cord from the wall in anger and turned to Aunt Jean, who sat passively on the couch. "One of these days, I'm just going to stop calling down there. They don't ever do anything. I can't remember the last time they sent a car out here. I know that's probably for the best, but it still ticks me off." She tilted her head to the side, and the perpetual smile she had grew just a little sadder. "It's all right. I can handle everything just fine on my own. I mean, you can stay if you want. I would try to find your family, but I'm starting to think you might not have one of those." It was then that I noticed the singe along the hemline of her dress and the dirt stained across the skirt. Tears ran along her collar and sleeves. She looked like she'd fallen up a mine shaft. I could have sworn those weren't there before. "Do you want something else to wear?" "I think I've got some spare clothes in the attic." Aunt Jean only sat there and smiled. If she'd spoken, I might have imagined her saying, "The Lord put me into this world in rags, and I'll leave it in rags." But I decided that a clean shirt couldn't hurt. If I could talk to the ancestors of mine that built this farmhouse, I think the first thing I'd ask is why they put the attic hatch in the upstairs bathroom. Only after that would I start getting into existentialism. I've got my priorities in order. The ladder came down with a heavy clunk on the stained bathroom tiles. The attic was mostly dark, but I made my way over to the wardrobe by the light of the glowing slime mold in the far corner. I always do my best to give it a wide berth, and it's a whole lot easier to let it keep existing up here than getting someone to wire a light socket into the attic. I still shudder to think about what Harry did with the last handyman who made it out here. There was only one outfit in the wardrobe, and I remembered too late that I moved everything else inside to the closet in the spare bedroom. The lavender shirt and brown pinafore hung still and silent there, as if staring me down. If my life had gone the way it should have, it wouldn't have been here. It would have been on the porch, snug on my mother as she watched the night sky, because how could she sleep when the rest of the world was so alive? The last time I'd seen her that happy was many years ago. The last time I'd seen her at all was when she took these clothes off and wandered into the unknown night, dancing down the dirt path like there was a song in the air only she could hear. I was just 14 then, and I'd been on my own ever since. On my own except for the animals, and now, a tentative new friend. I held onto the fabric and let myself believe for a second that I would go downstairs and my mother be waiting for me with peanut butter toast and a smile. But then I let go, and all that was left were footprints in the dust. When I made it out of the attic, I discovered that Aunt Jean had migrated up to the spare bedroom and must have found the closet. She was wearing a new white dress with a shawl. The shawl had belonged to my mother, but I'd never seen the dress before. Lighthouses were evenly spaced across the hemline, accented by foamy green waves and rocky islets. She did a little twirl as if she was asking what I thought. "I love it. It definitely suits you." She gave me a proud smile before moving to the corner and sitting down in a rocking chair that had never been in here before. Clearly she'd claimed the room as her own, and who was I to argue with that? I told her good night, and she just smiled at me. When I went downstairs to make sure all the doors had been locked, there was a plate sitting on the kitchen table. I sniffed at the toast left out for me. It was pecan butter, but that was close enough. I ate it in the dark, thinking about how it would really suck if I got a chest burster from eating toast. At least take me back to the mothership first. No one ever came for Aunt June, but that wasn't surprising. She integrated quite well to life on the farm. Most of the time she stays in her room, but sometimes I find her wandering around outside. She always makes it back, so I let her go generally wherever she pleases. Sometimes she stands on the roof, and sometimes I find her in the pasture with Milkshake and Dairy Queen. Sometimes she hides under the kitchen sink, and I even found her buried underneath the hay in the loft once. 3 years later, and she wasn't in any of those places today. Instead, she was collecting the eggs from the chicken coop. I didn't see her doing work around the farm much, not that it was a big issue. She was pushing 100, and I didn't mind if she spent her days sitting around and looking pretty. But I appreciated it on the rare occasions it happened. "Morning, Aunt Jean, how's the huevos haul looking today?" The chickens had formed a semicircle around her, watching us and clucking low and slow. Something wasn't right. Aunt John's smile never wavered as she pulled an egg from the basket and placed it in my hand. It was larger than the others and as bright red as a ripe apple. Well, I guess that answers that question. Now, which one of you laid this? I promise I won't be mad, just fess up. No chicken claimed ownership of the egg, and I couldn't say I hadn't known it would go down that way. They only watched on silently as I cracked it open. Foul, black yolk streamed out along with something large and leggy. It all landed on the ground with a wet thwup, and I had to pinch my nose closed. The leggy thing in the ichor began to wriggle around and scream, and I stumbled back. Aunt Jean brought her booted foot down on the strange humanoid, crushing it mid-screech. Okay then, I seriously doubt homunculi make very good omelets. I think it's time to switch the girls back to the old feed. Aunt Jean picked up the broken body of the tiny creature and swallowed it whole. Scratch that. I don't think they'd make very good omelets for most people. She smiled with old teeth stained black, and I started bracing myself for a trip to town. I wouldn't go until tomorrow, but even that wasn't enough time to mentally prepare. Sometimes I have a dream of a farm. Only the farm isn't a dream. The farm is where I live. Sometimes I dream of a man with the head of a pig. Only the pig man isn't a dream. He stands out in the fields every night and he watches me. Sometimes I have a dream where the pigman says my name, a name I haven't used in a long, long time. This one is a dream. The pigman never speaks to me. Last night I didn't dream about any of that. I dreamt of an apple. I walked through an orchard, and everything was dry and dead. I was alone, but there wasn't anything abnormal about that. Through all the withered wood I caught a glimpse of something bright and red. Rushing over, I saw the apple at the highest point on the tree, so I scraped my knees and knuckles up climbing to get it. I twisted and pulled it off, and when I took a bite, the taste of salt filled my mouth. I didn't like it, but I ate the entire thing. Juice ran down my chin, and I threw the core at the sky. Then I woke up wondering how my mouth still tasted like seawater. I quickly realized it wasn't something unexplainably carrying over from my dream. Just me forgetting to brush my teeth the night before. I got up and did my rounds in the morning mist. Then I took an extra hot shower. Today was going to be a long day. After cooking breakfast, doing chores, and anything else I could think of to put off leaving, I told Aunt Jean I'd be gone for an hour or two, and to make sure things were still at least somewhat normal around here. She just smiled at me and rocked away in her rocking chair, knitting an infinity scarf. Infinity as in it was a good 15 feet long and still going. I admired her dedication for as long as was reasonable, then just a little longer before loading onto Old Blue. The four-wheeler choked a few times, but she wasn't going to do me the favor of dying just when I wanted her to. Dust swallowed the path behind me as I tore around Silver's curve toward town. There was something bitter in the air that was unusual. It clung to the back of my throat and sinuses. It stayed around long after I'd reached the cracked asphalt of Battleman. Two-Tooth Steve was looking extra chipper today. When I walked in, he was humming along to System of a Down as he held a duckling. He was painting a small riot red mohawk on the head of the tiny ball of fluff and feathers. In lieu of a greeting, he held her out to me and stuck the brush back in the animal-safe paint. His free hand went up to his chin like he was appraising a priceless painting. "What do you think? Was red the right call? That's the one little Harriet here picked." Harriet quacked as if saying, "Damn right I did." "I think it suits her." And with that, Two-Tooth Steve stuck Harriet in his shirt pocket. "Was wondering when I'd see you again, Newport. How are the girls doing?" Two-Tooth Steve is a 6'5" metalhead with more piercings and tattoos than you can shake a stick at, and he owns the hardware and farm supply store in town. I'm lucky for it. He's one of the only people here who seems to enjoy having me around. Good, always good. I think I need to switch back to the old feed, though. They're laying weird eggs again, the kind of stuff I don't think would get FDA approved. Two-Tooth Steve nodded, poking his tongue thoughtfully through the gap where his two front teeth should have been. What color? I counted up the eggs and handed the basket over to him. A little bit redder than Harriet's new do. Also, there was a little creature inside of it that was definitely not any kind of chicken. I think I saw a tentacle. Oh, yeah, I think I'm going to stop selling that kind. I've heard some weird things. He handed me 2 large sacks of the old feed, and I hefted them onto my shoulders. Sometimes he would just pay me outright for the eggs, but most of the time we had a barter system. He said nobody else had eggs quite like mine, that there was just something special about them. Other than that, they're fine. Beelzebub went AWOL the other day, but she made it back express via poultry post. Two-Tooth Steve didn't question it. He'd heard enough weird stories from me, and he'd seen enough on his own. Oh, what her avian eyes must have witnessed. I laughed. At least I wasn't the only one who could wax poetic about a chicken. You're telling me she's got a new one now. I picked out a few other things, the most exciting of which being a shiny new rake for the barn, and paid him the difference from the cash I took from the lockbox at home. See you next week? I nodded. This was an emergency trip for the chickens, but every other Wednesday was shopping day. The landlady took care of most of my needs, but I was on my own with farm necessities. Oh yeah, Hephaestus gets cranky when he doesn't get a new salt lick. I'll be here even if a zombie plague descends upon us. Hey, I never turn down a paying customer, higher brain function or not. Harriet quacked again, and I valued her effort to be involved in the conversation. Then I took my things, said goodbye, and left. On most days, that would have been the end of it. I would have gone home and went back to my rural bubble, fit for only one. But I had packed a lunch for myself on a whim, and I was unusually hungry thinking about it. I decided that it might be nice to sit in the square and watch the cotton ball clouds drift by. Little did I know that a peanut butter and strawberry sandwich would alter the course of my life forever. Because as I walked into the square, that's when he first spoke to me. Did you find your chicken? I raised my eyebrow and turned to where the voice had come from. Sometimes the other farmers would set up stands here on clear afternoons, selling fruit and vegetables and whatever else they had in excess from what they made a living off of. I was never keen on the whole farmer's market thing, but this guy sure was. His little stand was decorated with papier-mâché flowers, and he had a few baskets full of admittedly cinema-perfect apples. Are you talking to me? It was a stupid question, considering we were the only 2 people around. But I was the #1 champion for 20 years running when it came to stupid questions. Yeah. Did you find your chicken? I saw your poster. I was worried about Beelzebub? Beelzebub. His broad nose scrunched just a little, as if he'd just caught a whiff of his own brain melting. Bubblezub? Beelzebub. I turned away from him and started walking toward the fountain. To my surprise and annoyance, he followed me. Beelzebub? I sat down on the edge and pretended that unwrapping my sandwich was the most interesting thing to be doing in the world. Close enough? And yeah, I found her. He sat down next to me, and I took a minute to get a good look at him while he wasn't making eye contact. He had a few good inches on me, but totally not enough to make me feel small. He'd tied his long black hair into a ponytail, and his skin, the color of Alabama clay, was sticky with summer sweat. Are you okay? You're kind of staring at me right now. The non-eye contact apparently hadn't lasted long. I blinked and looked away, focusing all my energy and trying to keep my face from going red. If I had been trying any harder, it would have turned blue. I'm fine. Don't think there's any rules against looking at people. Well, yeah, of course not. I wanted to make sure you weren't having a seizure or something. My aunt used to do that sometimes. Anyway, I'm glad you found your chicken. I saw the missing poster on my morning run the last few days. I'm Dawson. I live a little ways down the road from you. My family owns the apple orchard, and also the sheep. My mom also keeps bees. We've got a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-three thing going on. Newport. It wasn't that he wasn't being nice. It was that he was being too nice. He was being nice in the way that could have only been a joke when directed at someone who had the kind of reputation I did. We were on a playground, and he was the boy that wanted to go out with me. Yeah, sure. I took a bite of my sandwich, giving myself an excuse not to talk. But he seemed utterly unfazed. Oh, Newport, is that your name? Like the cigarettes? That's such a kick-ass name. I think it suits you. You know, I see you around sometimes and you always look so lonely. Is it true what they say? Do you? I stood up and started walking back to my four-wheeler. I didn't know what he'd heard and I didn't want to, and of fucking course he walked right after me. Wait, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. I actually have something for you. I turned around sharply, staring him down. His big green eyes were filled with remorse, and I hated that it felt real. What? What do you want? I shouldn't have said that. I kind of realize how it sounds now. A small part of me wanted to believe him, but most of me just wanted this interaction over. I wanted to go home and back to my solitude. I wanted to lose myself in a record. Music doesn't give you false pretenses of kindness unless it's supposed to, but you can always turn music off. Turning people off was a lot more complicated than it sounded. Save it. What do you want to give me? Dawson pulled an apple from his overall pocket and offered it out to me. It was the most gorgeous piece of fruit I'd ever seen, and I instantly despised it. Why are you giving me this? I didn't move to take it. One case of not enough stranger danger involving accepting an apple had done enough to make my life hell, and I was not about to be Eve 2.0. It's a gift, I've got plenty. I narrowed my eyes at him. I knew it had been coming, the hidden something in this interaction. Oh, because I can't pay for my own apples? That's probably the thing you've heard, isn't it? That I'm the poor, filthy it that lives in a shack out in the sticks and bites the heads off chickens or something. Dawson looked down at the apple, then back at me. His thick eyebrows pinched in concern. Nothing like that, Newport. It's just an apple. I knew I willingly gave him my name, but how dare he use it like that? I snatched the apple out of his hand, if only so he'd finally leave me alone. Listen to me. I'm not yours or anybody's charity case. Do you know what I'm going to do with this? Huh? Dawson got a stupid smile on his face. He looked like I was trying to tell him a joke and he didn't understand the punchline, but he thought I was funny anyway. Eat it? I'm going to take it home, sit in my kitchen window and watch it rot. I expected him to frown, maybe turn away or even take the apple back, but it was becoming clear to me that Dawson didn't care what I expected. Instead, his eyebrows jumped so high they might as well have launched off his face. But he didn't lose that smile. Just make sure you compost it afterward. Mother Nature will thank you. I stuffed away the sandwich that I'd only taken one bite out of with a squish. Then I continued walking back to my four-wheeler. This time Dawson didn't follow me. He just watched me go with an idiotic grin. I pulled out my Zippo and lit one of the hand-rolled cigarettes I'd brought with me. Then I jumped on Old Blue and sped off back towards home. Halfway back to the farm and all the way through my cigarette, I pulled out the mushed remains of my sandwich. I was still starving and beginning to feel a little faint. Riding with one arm was risky, but falling off my four-wheeler at high speed because I hadn't eaten since early this morning was definitely more so. I only made it a few bites in before I realized that something was definitely not right. The tart taste of strawberries turned sour and musty. It was like licking a carpet and not in a good way. When I pulled open the sandwich to give it my best Gordon Ramsay impression, what I saw made me lose control of the four-wheeler. My back hit the ground hard as Old Blue careened into the ditch. That was going to hurt like a bitch tomorrow. I rolled over and emptied my guts all over the ground, painting it with peanut butter and chunks of rotten meat. The abomination that had once been my lunch somehow landed only a few feet away, and I could smell it from here. I swatted a few ants off of my hand, residue from the ones that swarmed over the molded bird corpse that had appeared in my sandwich. Before I could make it to my feet, I heard something shifting around in the thick brush just ahead. I crawled over to my sideways four-wheeler, shrinking against the frame. Then, all around me, came the unmistakable sound of buzzing flies. My skin had been crawling before, but I was lucky then that it didn't crawl right off my body. It wouldn't have been the first time my skin betrayed me. As dread slowly washed over me, I tried to make myself as small and invisible as possible. I could hear cloven hooves approaching over the sounds of insects, and a wet, wheezing laugh that could have only come from lungs riddled with sickness. In the leaves I saw two hollow sockets, and that's when I have to hide became I need to run. With a rush of adrenaline that most people have to go 14,000 feet for, I stood up and pushed Old Blue back on all four wheels. Then I jumped on and raced down the ditch, no doubt doing damage to the tires. But I'd worry about that later. Whatever I'd seen, it didn't follow me. I don't remember how I got out of the ditch, but I made it home in record time. The next moment I remember clearly was standing in the barn. If my watch wasn't slow, it had been a little less than 30 minutes since I'd left town. Glancing out at the four-wheeler, I saw that the only thing that had suffered from the crash was the rake. It was slightly mangled at the edge, but that was nothing a good hammer couldn't fix. Not even Old Blue herself had any damage. It all felt a little too lucky. Sally was up on the ceiling again, her hooves clopping against the wood. It was a lot easier to focus on that than whatever the hell had just happened. Her pen partner, Davy Crockett, just looked up and watched her with complacency. His eyes told a story, and that story started with wives, am I right? You can't stay up there forever, Sally Ann. You're going to make yourself sick. She stared at me with her big yellow eyes, and then she opened her mouth. But instead of a bleat, out came a scream. Run! I practically threw myself out of the barn and made a mad dash for the house. I'd only made it onto the porch when I realized that the voice had been a familiar one. Of course it hadn't come from Sally. Everybody knows goats only scream Taylor Swift. It had been my well-spoken friend, living in my water supply at the edge of my backyard. Anna Well was still shouting her warning, and though knowing it was her still didn't ease my anxiety, I didn't break my door down trying to get inside. The walls only muffled the screeches a little. There was an endless list of things that needed to be done, but all I could do was pace around the room. Something about how I'd gotten away so easily wasn't sitting right with me. As I sat the apple I'd been given onto the windowsill, I was just beginning to accept that maybe the paranoia was stronger than usual today. Maybe the whole thing had been a vivid waking nightmare. Falling asleep on my four-wheeler sounded about like something I would do. That was when I saw a shape in the distance, moving up the long path to my house. Horror built in me, clogging my throat like an insidious golf ball. The idea that it was the thing I'd encountered on my way home scared me, but the possibility that it wasn't terrified me even more. I couldn't deal with destiny today. Even if I could get the shot right, you had to be in the right state of mind to dispose of a body. Nevertheless, I grabbed my shotgun and rushed out onto the porch. The figure was definitely a person, but I still couldn't make out who it was. I checked the chamber, dropped to one knee, and thumbed off the safety. Even with a deep breath, my hands were still shaking. But I lined up the shot and took it. Sometimes I wonder how different my life would have been if I hadn't missed that shot. The one thing I'm certain of is it would have been a whole lot worse, and probably a lot shorter. Instead of running away like any sensible person who just nearly took a bullet to the brain, the tall figure ran toward my house. It was then that I recognized that my trespasser was entirely human, and probably didn't know the first thing about tax evasion and foreclosure. Dawson had already made it halfway up the path, and I leveled the gun back at him. I missed intentionally this time, but not by much. He had to get the message. I did not want him here. To my surprise, he ran faster. I would have been worried he was coming to kill me if his face wasn't full of fear. Resigning myself to another interaction with him, I clicked the safety back on and walked back into the house, leaving the door open as I put my shotgun back in its usual spot. I grabbed a water bottle from the fridge, knowing I was definitely going to need to be hydrated for whatever this was. When I turned back around, Dawson was out of breath, doubled over in my doorway. It had to have been the fear stealing his breath. He was built like a redwood. Adrenaline's one hell of a drug, isn't it? There was a singed spot in his hair where the first bullet had just barely missed him. Oh, thank God you were here. Someone was shooting at me. I knew I would be safe here with you. I was shooting at you. Dawson's face crinkled in thought, and then he straightened up. Instead of cursing me out or leaving or any other number of deserved aggressions, he looked at me with an innocent and confused smile as if I'd just let the door close on him. Why'd you do that? I offered him a water bottle but gave him a dark look along with it, so he knew it wasn't an invitation to stay. Because you're a trespasser. Didn't you see the sign? It says private property. Trespassers will be executed. Dawson drained the entire water bottle in one go, then pulled something out of his pocket. And I'm guessing this is your private property too? I stared at the Zippo in his hands. I felt several spikes of retroactive panic and grabbed at it. He let me snatch it out of his hand without resistance, and I clutched it tight to my chest. Where did you get this? Did you take it? Dawson shook his head earnestly. You dropped it as you were leaving. I got this weird hunch it wasn't just something you'd picked up from Walmart. I checked it over, and save for being a bit dirty, it was in the same condition I'd lost it in. If it was anyone else, I wouldn't have believed that he hadn't taken it. but there was something weirdly genuine about him. I ran my finger across the long scratch left by my dad when it was still his. "You have no idea how much this means to me," I said, not really thinking about it. "Maybe not, but I know how it feels to lose something special, don't mention it." I set the lighter down by the radio, not trusting myself to keep track of it for at least the rest of the day. Then I grabbed my spare from the kitchen drawer. Even with the warp speed panic attack over, I still needed a cigarette. This doesn't make us friends, though. Dawson got that stupid grin of his. "Just promise you won't shoot at me next time?" He was a lot smarter than I gave him credit for at the time. It was a loaded question, and I totally fell for it. Deal. Dawson walked around the kitchen like a curious child, looking at almost everything. I could tell there were 1,000 questions about me bouncing around in his brain. But he kept them to himself. Then he looked at the apple in the window. "Ah, I see you're a man of your word. I like that." Not only did he show up to my house uninvited and run through my open door, but now he was affirming my gender too. The nerve of this guy was astounding. "Absolutely. It's going to stay right there until it gets the termites underneath it drunk." Dawson turned and looked back at me. "You know what I asked earlier? I was just wondering if it was true you lived all alone up here. I've heard about the chicken decapitation, yeah, but I already knew that was less than bullshit. I only thought that you must be awfully lonely." I thought carefully about how to answer that question, but in the end it didn't matter. The chickens started fluttering and fussing outside, and I heard crunching metal and snuffling breaths through the open door. I was out of the kitchen and running toward the coop before I even registered Dawson's "What was that?" In my haste, I'd grabbed the broom instead of my gun, but I swung it at Harry's big, stupid bear man face anyway. There was a hole in the side of the coop, and chickens were spilling out faster than you could say E-I-E-I-O. "Take your bear ass somewhere else. This isn't a goddamn Popeyes." Dawson only caught a glimpse of his face before Harry was jogging away. "Was that a man in a bear costume?" I turned to him and thrust the broom into his hands. "Worse, a bear in a man costume. Stay here and guard the girls. I've got to go disarm the electrical and get some chicken wire to fix this." Dawson saluted with the broom, leaving tiny dust bunnies in his hair. Somehow it suited him. When I made it back with the necessary stuff to fix the hole, Dawson was sitting on the ground with all the hens crowded around him. The chick sat on his legs, chirping happily and pecking at his work boots. Bees was monitoring the field trip like the matriarch she was. "Looks like I'm a real chick magnet, huh?" I rolled my eyes and got to work on the hole. I still didn't know just how I felt about this guy, but he'd passed the hen test with flying colors, and saying that was a good omen would have been an understatement. My dad and my brother were the only two people who'd ever gotten this reaction out of the girls. But still, I wasn't going to let them tell me what to think. "Sorry about that. Harry doesn't usually try anything when it's this hot outside." Dawson got up from the ground and cradled the chicks in his arms. I could tell he wanted to help me, but one does not simply put down fuzzy little yellow puffballs that want to be held. The hens seemed especially trusting with him holding their babies. Bees clucked low and slow, letting us know that she was still the boss of the situation. "What was that thing?" "Bear squatch." Dawson nodded and made a long ah as if it required no further explanation. "I call him Harry Houdini because there's literally no way he should be able to get in here. It's got a shock trigger on it. Doesn't hurt the hens, but it could literally fry an elephant. I've accidentally set it off once or twice. It's no joke. Have you tried setting out peanut butter?" I gave him a skeptical look. Is it really a good idea to be putting out a buffet for the chicken thief? "Well, if he's intelligent enough to break into the coop, you can probably train him. A little positive reinforcement never hurts, and besides, it'll keep him from using his mouth for a little while. That's what we did when my dogs were still puppies." I didn't want to admit it was a good idea, so I shrugged, but internally I told myself to see if the landlady would bring me a little extra peanut butter at the end of the month. I guess that answers my question about you being lonely. You've got Barry Houdini to keep you company. I didn't bother correcting him. The coop was fixed, and so I lit my cigarette and offered Dawson one. The guy put off a vibe like he dreamt in anti-smoking ads, but he took it anyway. I looked out to the forest and then back to him. "Well, there are things around here. Things like Harry and the lady that screams down in the well. But they don't really live here. It's just me, and I guess I do get lonely. But it's hard to even remember how lonely feels. Everything becomes unremarkable when you deal with it for long enough, and when loneliness is your default setting, well, I shook my head and took a long drag. I turned away, waiting for Dawson to tell me how sad that, and by extension, my life was. But it never came. Instead, I noticed something moving through the trees. The ground began to turn black, racing toward me like a heat-seeking missile. Before I could even make it a step back, I was staring into the milky white of a diseased bovine eye, inches away from my face. This thing must have picked it up at the discount store in the time since I had seen it last. Then I blinked and my surroundings changed entirely. Oh God, not this. All the green had been replaced with barren grays and browns, and my home was little more than a wasteland in nuclear summer. There was only one other thing in this empty place. What had once been a mildly annoying farmer boy sweet-talking some chicks was now a sun-bleached skeleton. The cigarette I'd given him still hung from its mouth, smoking lightly. I opened my mouth to say something. Anything. But the words just weren't there. My brain had tried to process all of this for about 2 seconds before hanging up the gone fishin' sign. Are you okay, dude? You're staring at me again. His teeth clicked together as he spoke, and he reached a bony hand up and took the cigarette from his mouth. I think I should be asking you that. You're literally a skeleton right now. Even with no possible way he could have an expression on his face, I still knew he was smiling. And not just a permanent, I have no cheeks smile. You know, my mom tells me that a lot. I just put it off as her being her, but maybe she has a point. I blinked, and within that half a second, everything was normal again. The color hurt my eyes, but I didn't want to close them, just in case it somehow sent me back. Did I upset you again? Feel free to ignore what I said. I scooped up Beelzebub and held her close, glad she hadn't gotten turned into chicken scratch. Sorry, what did you say? I think I missed it. Dawson gently placed the chicks he was holding back into the coop, and the hens swiftly followed. I said that I think you're a strong person. Maybe that sounds stupid, but it takes a lot to be able to make it on your own. You're clearly doing well for yourself out here. It's honorable in a strange way. I kind of really admire you for it. The cigarette, which Dawson had put back in my mouth, nearly fell from between my lips again. I didn't know what to say, and I assumed he thought he'd upset me. So we just stared at each other for a minute. Geez, give me a medal, why don't you? I was fighting a stacked battle against the smile that wanted to come over my face and losing terribly. You're not mad at me? Oh, I'm mad at you for several reasons, but no, that's not one of them. Once all but one of the chickens were all safe inside their refurbished one-bedroom apartment, Dawson and I began to head back to the house. Wait, I thought you said you lived alone. Who is that? Aunt Jean was standing on the porch, a glass of lemonade in one hand, and a corn spider big enough to kill a rabbit rested on her other. I had been wondering what the bumping around in the attic was the night before, so I guessed that answered that question. What? It's just a corn spider. Dawson shook his head and pointed toward the old woman. She grinned and waved him off like a shy debutante. Oh, you mean Aunt Jean? I wouldn't say she lives here, it's more like she exists here. I don't really know what her deal is, but she's nice, she won't bite you. Actually, no, scratch that. She probably won't bite you. I still don't fully know what that lady is capable of. Aunt Jean bent down and let the corn spider climb off her arm. Like a watchman returning to his post, it began a slow crawl back to the cornfield. Then she walked back inside. I glanced at the house, then to Dawson, then the house again. I was probably going to regret it later, but he accepted the invitation before I had any time to really consider what I was doing. I had a brand new Florence the Parse the Machine record that I hadn't played nearly enough, and I wanted to feel out his music taste. You know, you're weird, Newport, really weird. But I like weird things. I opened the door for him, bringing Bees in with me. If I decided to get rid of him after all, I knew she would lend a wing. Say one more sappy thing and I'll put you on an express flight to the moon on Fist Airlines. I couldn't say fully how I felt about Dawson yet, but the unnamed evil lurking around had made me realize something. I much preferred him alive rather than dead. When I was a baby, I had borderline insomnia. On the nights my mother was desperate, she would bring me out onto the porch, and within minutes of basking in the starlight, I would be asleep. That's how she used to tell it anyway. It explains why every time I stand on the porch, even during my watches, I feel some level of comfort. Parts of myself are so deeply ground into this house that I can feel it beneath my skin when the old wooden bones creak in the night. It had been a few days since I'd first met the beast that haunted my dreams, and also that weird cow thing. The rain earlier in the week had somehow left the ground much drier once it all evaporated, and the animals were dustier than tofu in an abattoir. There wasn't a cloud in sight that morning. As much as I would have liked to waste the day away on the porch with a glass of Aunt Jean's anomalously acquired lemonade, it was barnyard bath day. I put the chickens in bath jail, a puppy pen placed nearby so I could keep an eye on them, with bath jail scrawled on a cardboard sign and a shallow pan of warm water inside, and tried to decide who would be my first victim. Either Aunt Jean or a very ineffective cow thief had already brought Milkshake and Dairy Queen to the barn. I ultimately gave in to the fact that it would be best to do the most difficult of my clients first. It took 3 sugar cubes just to get Hephaestus out of the barn, and another to keep him from running off when I turned on the water nozzle. He wasn't scared by any of it. I would have found a less obtrusive way to bathe him if he had been. He was just annoyed, like he was with pretty much everything. A bastard for sure, but a bastard I couldn't imagine life without. Hephaestus, nothing if not predictable, took a solid hour and a half to bathe and another hour to brush out, mainly because whenever I lifted the brush and started to walk off, he would grumble at me. When he was clean, I walked him to the pasture to get some of his energy out and dry off. Then it was time to reopen the car wash. Sally, seeing clear evidence that it was bath day through the open barn door, stood in the doorway bleating at me. I knew that the cobwebs on the barn ceiling were a menace, and she was always keen to get her orange hair scrubbed out and brushed. "Do you want to go next, Miss Sally Ann?" Bleat. "Oh, I bet you do. You've been visiting the roof boards more than usual. I bet you're Dirt City." Bleat. "Come on over here then, Sally Ann Thunder Ann Whirlwind." She yelled at me one more time before trotting over. She enjoyed bath day the most and would even let me polish her hooves. Her husband, though, he was an entirely different story. Davy Crockett was big and bad enough to send Black Phillip running back home to his lake of fire, and he wasn't afraid to tell me how much he hated his bath. I almost got a foot right to the face. When they were done, I sent them out to the pasture with Hef. Milkshake and Dairy Queen always had to be bathed together. I had never thought that cows could have such extreme separation anxiety before I bought Milkshake. Cows need companions, and my steer French fry had passed away from what was most likely a broken heart. I'd gotten her in town for $10, and when I asked why she was being sold for such an insanely low price, the man simply replied with "cow broke" and invited me to lay a hand on her. She was constantly emitting gentle vibrations like she had an engine inside of her. But if she was a robot, she was a convincing one. I named her Milkshake. If you saw Dairy Queen, you saw Milkshake, no exceptions. They were inseparable. Maybe they were best friends, maybe something more. I was in no place to judge a lesbian cow. The last 2 to be bathed were also a unique challenge. My sow, Hermia, was old and patient enough, but her son, Hamlet, couldn't stay still to save his life. The little piglet had always been a piglet. I asked my dad about it once when we'd kept more pigs. He just said, "Little hen, he can't change who he is any more than we can change who we are. Maybe he just can't bear to get old." That was enough of an explanation for me. Not everything needs a reason. Sometimes things just are, and that's all right in my book. Getting Hamlet bathed always ended with me drenched, and that time was no different. When mother and son were finished, I looked like I'd taken a leisurely stroll into the Amazon rainforest. Hamlet gave me the most generous thank you of burping in my face before getting the zoomies the second I put him down. Once everyone was clean, the sun was already half hiding behind the treetops. I ensured the girls were warm and dry after their stint in the bath pan, then cleaned the coop. Harry had the decency to respect the sanctity of bath day, and back in the hens went once it was tidy. I got all the animals back to their designated places, made sure they were fed and comfortable, and then I went to take a bath of my own. Dawson was coming over, and I'd be damned if I let that asshole call me smelly. I ran the water as hot as it would go and scrubbed until my already aching hands cried out no more. When I got out of the bath, I was a little wobbly. Instead of realizing how dehydrated I was, I chalked it up to the usual fatigue of a hard day's work and went to the porch. The sun sank behind the pines. Dawson would be here any minute, so I sat down to wait for him. I'd invited him over to watch something with me. I'd meant to start it, but I didn't trust myself to finish shows on my own. Almost immediately after I sat, everything started to turn bright yellow, and I passed out. At some point, lost consciousness turned into groggy half-awareness, then dreamless sleep. The memories of being awake were vague. Someone forcing my mouth open, water and oatmeal, and a knitted blanket thrown over me. It wasn't hard to guess later who it was. Only one of the likely suspects was present. When I woke up, it wasn't on the porch or even in my bed. I was lying face down in the dirt, and a worm was putting its blood, sweat, and tears into trying to crawl into my nostril. I tugged it out and flung it somewhere into the cornfield surrounding me on all sides. A strange smell clogged my mouth and nose, and it wasn't just worm. It also wasn't the bloody footprints surrounding where I'd woken up, the massive kind with only one definitive source, even though I could definitely smell the sweet iron. No, the foul smell plaguing me came from the corn itself. On close examination, I could see where the bottom of some of the stalks had turned withered brown and even gray. The sight and smell both meant one thing. Death was sure to follow. I got to my feet, panic slowly building in me. All I could think of was losing most of the crop. Sure, I got what I needed to survive from the landlady, but the farm couldn't function without the money I earned from the harvest each year. Just as I'd decided that was my biggest problem, it was immediately dethroned. In the moonless, faint dark of early morning, I saw a wave of grimy black mold sweeping across the ground toward me. I nearly tripped on my own feet as I stumbled back through the row. It followed me until I reached the edge of the field, and then it stopped. I thought that maybe it wouldn't leave the cornfield. Maybe it couldn't. I took a shaky backward step toward the house. The black began to burble like bog water, almost as if I'd made whatever it was angry. "Oh, you don't like that, do you? Well, I'm gonna go get in my comfy bed and you can stay out here with the pigmen. How about them apples?" The bubble solidified as something crawled out of the ick. This is probably one of the worst times to step back from the action, but I have to share a memory first. When I turned double digits, my mother had a brief but intense aliens are real phase. She had a lot of special interests like that. I remember sitting in our living room patching one of my favorite pairs of jeans while my mom watched a documentary about Roswell and alien sightings in the Midwest. My mom changed the channel when they started talking about cow mutilation, but I'd seen enough. What I saw crawling out of the black was reminiscent of the foggy, gruesome images that memory conjured. Its lower jaw hung loose and broken, missing most of the skin. The right side of its face clung to its skull in bloody shreds, and it had only one cloudy, cataract-filled eye. It huffed as it moved jerkily toward me as if every step caused it great pain. The white speckled along its black coat was not bicoloration but large patches of pale mold. I was honestly a little pissed that I was in a standoff with this thing when I could be fast asleep in my cozy bed. Zombie cows were not a planned part of my hot gender-fluid summer. Nice cow. I don't want any trouble. I bet you'd like some corn, wouldn't you? Why don't you just stay out here and have all you want, and I'm going to go back in the house. I was about to turn and run for the porch when my foot caught a pothole. I fell right on my ass into the dirt driveway, and then that was when the buzzing started. I could hear flies and feel them trying to crawl in my mouth and nose, even though nothing was actually there. "Get the fuck away from me. Go back to Hooven hell or something." The rotten thing moved much faster now that I was down, and its breath smelled like moldy milk carpet. I held my breath, kicked my leg up as hard as I could, and was rewarded with a shower of cold cow intestines all over my knees as its stomach burst like a water balloon. Somehow it didn't seem to mind being gutted. It thumped a hoof down hard on my chest, and the air shot out of my lungs with a hacking gasp. Its own intestines snaked up and out of its open mouth, snapping around my throat, and whenever I ripped one off, another took its place. I kicked and thrashed, and finally realized that maybe I should be screaming for help, so I did. If this thing wanted me as its girl dinner, I wouldn't make it easy. Just when my vision was darkening and I could feel its flat, cracked teeth against my nose, we were both bathed in harsh light. I turned and saw a truck barreling down the road toward me and my new friend. It closed the distance at full tilt, horn blaring, and the cow thing released its grip on me and sprinted back into the cornfield. I collapsed back onto the ground and the tires of the red Ford stopped about a foot from my face. My unlikely savior jumped from the truck with it still running and scooped me up out of the dirt. Without a word, Dawson threw me in the passenger seat and got back in on the other side, locking the doors. "Are you okay?" I was. I was definitely a little worse for wear. I couldn't think of a time I'd ever smelled this bad. But I was alive, and if Dawson hadn't shown up, I probably wouldn't have been. As much as it annoyed me to admit, if this had happened even a week ago, I would have been burnt toast. But I didn't tell him that. He probably already knew anyway. It was so stupid how smart he could be sometimes. I'm fine. I probably would have been a lot more fine if I'd fallen asleep watching Good Omens last night with someone who was supposed to be here sooner. Dawson sheepishly drove us the short distance back to the house. I know, I didn't just ditch you, I swear, I was coming to apologize actually. I brought breakfast. That's when I realized what the smell that was slowly invading my nostrils and replacing all the bad ones was. There were few things that could smooth over anger like a greasy McDonald's breakfast. Well, you'd better have a good excuse. Dawson looked around nervously and turned off the truck. I'll tell you all about it, let's just get inside. I don't know if that thing is gone. Oh God, my mom is going to kill me when she finds out I didn't turn around and speed out of here with you. I glanced around before opening the door and making a beeline for the house. Dawson followed with the food, and I let him in first before slamming the door behind us. I wasn't too worried about anything going after the animals, not yet anyway. Davy Crockett had enough old man rage to level a building. Do you have any idea what that was? Because I don't. All I've got is an undead cow, which doesn't feel right. Dawson shook his head. Bad news is what it is. I've only ever gotten the feeling I got seeing that once before. It's something evil. I sat down as Dawson laid out breakfast. Even after what I'd just been through, my appetite was still very much there. I swallowed a mouthful of half-chewed pancakes. What did you see? He got this deer-in-the-headlights look. When I was little, my family and I were visiting relatives on the res. I saw something one night. Something I shouldn't have. Something evil. My mom doesn't really like me talking about it with strangers, or with anyone, really. It's not that I don't trust you, of course, it's just… No, I get it. We all have to have some secrets. Sometimes it's safer that way. Do you think this is the same kind of thing? By now, dawn was breaking, and seeing the first light made me feel worlds better. I had never seen the pigman during the day, and even if the two weren't related, it inspired some confidence in me. Monsters didn't like daylight, right? I don't think so, but it's nothing good either way. Could we maybe change the subject, though? At least for a little while. Well, I said, moving on to the impressive amount of hash browns he'd brought. We could talk about how you stood me up last night. Dawson sighed and drenched his pancake in syrup. After we finished eating, I would have to do my rounds. Even if I was a little angry at him, I was glad to have him here for when I had to go back outside. I was just getting ready to leave when my dad called me to the barn. One of our ewes went into labor, and I spent the night elbow-deep in sheep vagina. Sheep vagina? Dawson laughed, but it was nervous. Yep, I would have much rather been elbow-deep in a bowl of popcorn. I laughed too, but for much longer. Then I realized I couldn't stop. I threw my hands down on the table and cackled until tears sprang up in my eyes. And they decided that this was their party now. The massive hoofprint bruise hiding beneath my shirt ached as I sobbed. Oh, Newport, it was a rough delivery, and by the time Mom and Baby were situated and we were done, I went inside and passed out on the couch. I should have at least texted. All this is on me. Fuck, I'm really sorry. I shook my head and got up from the table. Dawson followed me as I grabbed my shotgun and walked out onto the porch, still unable to stop the tide of tears. It's not that, Dawson. I don't care about you playing ovine obstetrician, it was just that I was terrified for the well-being of myself and of my home. It was just that this rot creature didn't fit in with any of the usual oddities on the farm. It was dissonant and evil, and I could feel in my bones that it wouldn't be gone for long. It was just that I'd come close enough to death to feel its maw against my face. It was just that Dawson had saved my life. I'm just worried. Really worried. Dawson had been following me around like a puppy, but I heard his footsteps distinctly stop then. Hey. I turned and looked back at him. He had an expression I'd never seen on him before. Stony seriousness. It's okay to be worried, but it'll be all right regardless. I can tell this place means a lot to you, and we won't let anything threaten that. Or you. Dawson put both hands on my shoulders, and in the firmest, no-nonsense voice he said, "Fuck that zombie cow, he's a little bitch." Just like that, he had me laughing again, and this time the tears didn't come back. He dropped his hands and smiled. Knew I could get you to laugh. Oh my God, I said, wiping my eyes, just walk with me. I need someone to share my last cigarette with before I roll some more, and I'd rather not find out if Mr. Knight of the Living Beef is a smoker. Dawson started following me again, but this time he kept pace. I lit the cigarette and offered it out to him first. By the time we circled back to the porch, all that was left was smoke on our breaths. I heard him walk into the house, but I stayed, making sure the shotgun was loaded and looking out over the path. I could still see the deep tire tracks from when Dawson slammed on his brakes if I squinted. "What are you doing?" I didn't take my eyes off the road, but a smile crept over my face. "You've got your secrets, I've got mine." I gave it exactly 10 minutes before standing and turning back. Dawson was watching me, and he probably had been the whole time. "Keep your secrets," he said with a dumb grin. "Just come finish breakfast with me." So we sat in the kitchen together and finished our McDonald's on chipped china. It wasn't often that I got fast food like this, and even with it having grown colder than a banshee at her ex's wedding, I still ate every bite of it. "So I'm going to make us some coffee if I can figure out the caffeine dinosaur you've got over there." He was right. That coffee machine looked like it jumped out of the 50s, but I'd never gotten a better cup anywhere else. "And then we'll figure out what we should do next." I would call my mom and ask her, but I don't feel like the mom voice this early. I picked up our plates and looked over where Aunt Jean stood by the hissing coffee pot. "Someone beat you to it." Dawson caught my gaze and jumped a little when he saw her. "How did she get down here? I didn't see her or hear her come down the stairs, did you?" "Nope. If you're hanging around here, you might as well get used to it. Sometimes she's just there, and then she's somewhere else. But her teleportation has never been particularly malicious." Aunt Jean walked over and handed him 2 things. The first was a cup of coffee, which I was expecting. If she had spoken, she would have said something like, "Guests always come first in this house, chickadee." The second was an ice pack. Thank you, Aunt Jean. It's really nice to meet you properly." Aunt Jean took on a serious look. She gestured to the ice pack, then to me, before holding both wrinkly hands on her chest. It took Dawson a minute to register the message, but once he did, he came over quickly and with visible concern. "That thing hurt you bad, didn't it?" The soreness and pain that I'd been trying to ignore for the past hour flared up at his words. But I did my best to deny it. "I'm fine, I swear. Just some bruises and things I'd have to talk to my therapist about if I had one." "I don't believe you, take it." I stared at Dawson, and he stared at me. Neither of us was backing down. That was until Dawson cheated. A hard poke in the chest was all it took for me to wince and mutter, "Fuck," and Dawson shoved the ice pack into my hands. That was totally unfair, you know that? "Yeah, I know. Now ice that." As uncomfortable as the chill was, I gave in and stuffed the ice pack into my binder. Seeing that Dawson had won the ice pack battle, Aunt Jean walked over and pinched his cheek like he was an adorable baby. Then, for the first time ever, Aunt Jean spoke. "Well, that's not totally right." Her mouth formed the words, but the voice that came out of it definitely wasn't hers. It was a little girl's, spoken like a child would talk to a dog. "Good boy." I watched Dawson's cheeks tinge slightly red. "Yeah, I do my best. Someone's got to make sure they take care of themselves." Aunt Jean's smile widened before she approached me and placed a steaming mug in my hand. "So we're feeling talkative today, Jeannie?" She reached out and gently patted my cheek. I caught the scent of Dove soap and then she was gone. "She's quite the character, isn't she?" Dawson turned to me and grinned the same dumb grin he got whenever he was proud of himself. It annoyed me how easily I'd come to recognize it in the short time we'd known each other. "She really is something. I think she likes me." I took a sip of my coffee. It was burning hot, but I was still shivering from the ice pack, so a warm stomach for a scalded tongue was a fair enough trade. "Don't get a big head over it. Aunt Jean likes everyone, well, most everyone." Like the bastard he was, Dawson walked over and started washing our dishes from breakfast. It was only 2 plates, but I was still ready to kick his ass over it. "I see where you're coming from, but let me ask you this. Has she ever spoken to anyone else besides you?" I wasn't about to tell him she hadn't spoken to me. I would have been jealous, except for the fact that I wasn't. Aunt Jean and I had a special bond, and I almost always could sense what she was thinking. Words are loud and unwieldy sometimes, and there's a certain dignity and comfort in quiet companionship. "Touché, asshole." "Maybe she likes me better," he says, using that tone of voice that tells me he doesn't actually believe that but wants to annoy me. "Maybe you can take a nice long walk right into the Grand Canyon." I bet I'd do a good job being you. Couldn't be that hard, though I might go bankrupt on overalls alone. For a moment, I actually wondered if Dawson would do a good job running the farm. All signs pointed to no, but I didn't necessarily see it as a bad thing. Keeping this farm from going to shit is a difficult job, and it's made me a hard person. I wouldn't want that to happen to him. Plus, there's not much McDonald's breakfast out here, Or that cereal he really likes. I wasn't sure I'd like the person Dawson would become if he spent that much time around here. Oh please, you'd be running out of here in less than a day with your tail tucked between your legs and Davy Crockett hot on your ass. Oh really? Well, I'll have you know that your horse likes me better. I gasped in mock outrage. I was almost certain that wasn't true, but I respected the spirit of dramatics. How dare you? A curse on you. A curse upon your house, a curse upon your cow, a curse upon your... I was interrupted by a marimba. Dawson and I glanced at his phone, which lay on the table. The screen lit up with the word, Mama. Looks like your curse worked, Dawson said with a dry laugh. Oh, she's going to kill me. Then he answered it. The yell that came out of that tiny speaker could have been heard clear across the state. There's no force greater than a worried mother. Other than her yell, all I heard was Dawson's side of the conversation. Yes, Mama, I'm fine. No, I'm not outside. I know there's something bad out there. Yeah, I know, you always feel things like that. I snuck into the next room, far enough to be out of the way but close enough to still hear. No, Mama, I don't have it, but I can't just leave. Newport will be here all alone and that thing might come back and... No, Mama, it's not like that. They're just... Mama, I can't leave them like that and fine, I'll try, but I don't think it'll work. I know, Mama, I know you're looking out for me. I love you too. After a few minutes of silence, Dawson joined me in the living room. Hey, not a chance. I'm not leaving this farm while that thing is out there somewhere. I don't think Davy can hold his own for that long. Dawson sighed. I knew you'd say that. I tried to tell her, but she's going to have my ass if I don't go get some sort of protection from her. I usually have my necklace, but I was rushing out and I forgot it today. I picked my shotgun up again from where I had laid it and peeked outside. The sun was warming up the fields. A gentle wind blew through the cornstalks and I could hear the yellowhammers as they went chee-chee-chee-squee amongst the trees. It was turning into a deceptively beautiful day. She said if I want to stay with you, she won't stop me as long as I get something to protect us. But I'm not leaving you here without a way to go. You can keep the truck, I'll walk. A gruesome picture invaded my brain at Dawson's words. Him walking down the path, and before he could even make it out of sight, a black and rotting blur tore out of the cornfield and slashed into him, spraying bright red blood everywhere, and putting on a gory horror show worthy of an A24 flick. Number, you're not walking. If you want to leave me the truck, fine. I won't argue with you on that, but we're going to find you a better way out of here. I didn't give him any time to disagree. I just snatched his wrist and pulled him out toward the barn. I already know my truck isn't going to work. It needs a new radiator and I can't get one until next month. The four-wheeler has been slow lately, and I don't think we should take that risk. Dawson walked over to the horse stable just like I was afraid he would. I would have rather he rode Beelzebub. What about your horse? I'm sure he's fast enough. I scratched the back of my head. Hephaestus could be pretty rough when he wanted to be. I don't know. Hephaestus narrowed his eyes at Dawson, but he reached out to scratch his snout. All right, old man, I know you don't like me. But let's have a truce for now, okay? I've got to get where I'm going. To my surprise, instead of shooting out and snapping at him like the feral dog he was, Hephaestus closed his eyes and sighed. If you've never heard a horse sigh in content, I feel sorry for you and recommend you go find a horse at your earliest convenience. You do like him better, you bastard. Hef actually rolled his big horse eyes at me, like I was the dramatic one out of the two of us. I wouldn't take it personally, I'm just the cool uncle. I walked over and grabbed the saddle, thrusting it into Dawson's hands. Well, let's see if the cool uncle can get his saddle on with all his fingers intact. Do you know how to ride a horse? Dawson gave me a tilt of the hand that inspired so little faith. I know all the basics, but it's been a while since I've actually used them, like years. I pulled out a carrot I'd forgotten in my pocket and had him give it to Hef, hoping we could buy his patience. Well, all I can tell you is good luck. You're probably going to need it. Time for the saddle. To my surprise and continued annoyance, Dawson got it on pretty easily. He'd passed the horse test now, too. In fact, all the animals besides me had adjusted to his presence like he'd always been here. Having him around still felt so weird, but the idea of him leaving felt worse than that. It felt bad. I didn't like to think about it for long because then the questions I didn't want to answer started to surface. Look at me, I'm a natural. I was brought out of the haze that was beginning to consume me by Dawson trotting around the barn on Hef. Both looked very pleased with themselves. I could tell Dawson was expecting me to come back with some smart-ass remark, and honestly, so did I. But whatever I would have said stayed lost in the useless hunk of meat that was my brain at the moment. "Come back, okay?" Dawson pulled Hef to a stop and stared down at me. "Because if you or Hef get splattered across the dirt road up here, it's going to attract crows. And they're totally going for the corn next, and that would be super lame." I hated the way Dawson's expression changed. It got softer and his eyebrows pinched together. "I'll be all right, Newport." I promise. I just shook my head and looked away. Who else is going to make you pull that annoyed face you're pulling right now? If he had been beside me then, I would have for sure taken his tree branch elbow to my ribs. As I turned back to him, I almost felt it telepathically. I gave him what some might have called a smile. I hated how it sat on my face. It reeked of worry, and my concern for his well-being was none of his business. I led Hef out of the barn door, stopping just short of it. The sun was hot and the air was filled with the noise of Mother Nature, totally unbothered. But with the feeling in my stomach, it might as well have been the deepest depths of night. "Nobody would do it better. Keep your eyes out for that thing. I don't think it's scared of the daylight, Dawson." He nodded, and I laid my hand on Hephaestus's flank, silently pleading for the old stallion to keep his cargo safe. Then I slapped him on the behind with a hiya, and he tore down off the dirt road with Dawson. "Look at me," I heard him yelling as they rode away. "I'm riding a fucking horse." I had a sneaking suspicion that he had lied about his history with equestrians, but it seemed like he was managing regardless. "Don't yell like that, you're ringing the damn dinner bell." It was hard to tell from how far down he had made it, but I swear he turned back to look at me and winked. I sighed, shook my head, and went back into the barn. Usually the animals ate before me, but today hadn't been a usual day thus far, and my money was on it staying that way. Still, I could tell Davy was getting crankier than an old man who hadn't gone to bed by 7. After everyone was fed and seen to, I went inside and made sure all the doors were locked. Then I treated myself to a decadent lunch of a handful of Cheetos from the bag I picked up in town. The landlady rarely brought me anything besides healthy food and fresh ingredients, so it was my duty alone to treat myself. Then I went to shower. I was only just remembering that there was still dried cow gunk all over me. When that was done, I busied myself with household chores as best I could. I kept Kurt Cobain's voice rattling out of my stereo as high as it would go, trying to fight off the nervous something that was threatening to crawl up my back in every single moment of silence. I dragged my dustbuster all over the house, glad that I'd finally broken down and gotten Two-Tooth Steve to order me a Dyson using just a little of the liquid cash I kept in the lockbox. I tried to be very careful with what I used that money for, but a man can only bust the dust for so long. My days of bunnies under the bed would soon be no more. Afternoon crept into evening, and something in me knotted up when I had to flick the porch light on. I'd gotten no word from Dawson, not even a text. Not that there was much service out here. Aunt Jean stood by the kitchen window, staring into the gathering darkness. It was hard not to join her, but a nagging feeling in my gut told me that's what it wanted. It all suddenly made no difference when I heard Dawson calling my name outside. I was too relieved to think straight for a few seconds, and that was all it took. I threw open the door and raced off the porch like there were springs in my feet. I scanned down the long, lonely path to the main road. Dawson was nowhere to be seen, but I did hear footsteps behind me. They were slow and disjointed. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2. I wheeled around as the rot picked up the pace, sprinting toward me as much as a festering cow carcass could. Broken bone shone white in each of its legs. I staggered backward with my mind screaming all the while to turn around and run like hell. But everything felt like jelly. The rot's gory jaw fell open, letting loose a death wail. Then it closed in on me, coming in for the kill. I shut my eyes tight. I expected to hear the squelch of my flesh being ripped off or the wheeze of its breath right against my ear. I wish I had, because what I actually heard was a million times worse. There was the sound of broken footfalls passing me by and Dawson yelling my name. This time it was actually him. I watched his smile fall into a look of unabashed fear in real time. The world was suddenly on fire. The feeling of slogging through a jam jar was gone, and suddenly every move was at warp speed. I was on the porch, off the porch, halfway down the road, sprinting so hard my legs stung. My shotgun was in my hand. When did I grab it? I was getting there, but not fast enough. Hef let out the most terrified whinny I'd ever heard, and from where I was, I could see the panic in Dawson's wide eyes. The rot was a few more strides and a claw swipe from going all ominous unknown killer on my horse. Everything was a blur of motion after that. The Wi-Fi signal to my consciousness must have been extra shitty that day. There was a loud crack and Dawson was on the ground and Hef was running back toward the barn without him. And Dawson was clutching his wrist to his chest and I was lifting my gun and the rot was leaning over him, and its intestines were wrapping around his neck and bang. Time jerked to a halt. The rot wobbled slightly, a massive hole blown into its meaty skull. I didn't move or even breathe while waiting for it to fall. The only sound was Dawson whimpering quietly. I shot it and now it was over, right? Right? Pigs can be very dangerous animals. There's a reason why Dorothy's uncle freaked out when she fell into the pig pen in The Wizard of Oz. I'm not talking about wild boars either. Farm pigs aren't aggressive or carrying some zombie plague, as far as I know, but the danger lies in their appetite. Anyone who lives on a farm with them for even just a few days knows that they are definitely not herbivores. They'll eat just about anything, all the way up to human bones. I guess that's one way to get your calcium. Now don't get me wrong, if you fall into a pig pen, you're more than likely going to be all right, as long as the fall doesn't knock you out. But let's say the back of your head hits the ground particularly hard. You're unconscious. A group of even slightly hungry pigs will probably start with your clothes, boots, hair, and maybe even your ears. But if you give them long enough, once they've got going, they'll do much more permanent damage. My maternal great-grandfather was a pig farmer. One day in a record-temperature July, he got a bad case of heat stroke and did just that. He was passed out in that pig pen for an hour and a half before my great-grandmother found him and, nurse instincts kicking in, rushed him to the hospital. He lived, but he lost 3 fingers, had been given plenty of scars that would never fully heal, and had to walk with a cane for the rest of his life. Why am I telling you all this? Well, suffice it to say, I would rather cover myself in ketchup and honey and take a long nap in a commercial pigsty than have to look out of my kitchen window at night and see that pigman standing in the fields one more damn time. Before I make it sound like I hate pigs, I don't. All domesticated animals come with their own dangers, and most won't hurt you unless you somehow give them the opportunity, even unintentionally. There's something to be said about the intelligence and even kindness of the humble swine. But that thing, it was different. Every time I caught sight of the shine of its dewy, misshapen eyes in the darkness, I felt sick to my stomach. Hamlet squealed and put his little hooves on my chest as if he could read my thoughts and was pleading his little piggy case. I sat the brush down and scooped him into my arms, rocking him like a babe. "Oh, you're not gobbling up anyone's fingers, are you, little guy?" He squirmed around and oinked like a giant porky worm, and I gave him a slice of apple before letting him go. Dawson was always bringing apples over now, and the animals loved it. I wouldn't admit it to him, but so did I. I gave Hamlet back to his appreciative mother and brushed off the seat of my overalls. The afternoon sweltered, even in the shade of the barn, and my throat was dry. I made sure everyone had plenty of water before going back toward the house. Maybe Aunt Jean could pull some sweet iced tea out of a pocket dimension because I'd forgotten to make more. Dawson was going to kick my ass when he made it over for dinner. A glass of tea with a lemon slice was waiting on the kitchen table when I went inside, like I'd tuplat it up. Reading minds would have been the least surprising thing Aunt Jean was capable of. I gave it a cursory poison sniff, drank it down, and then popped the lemon slice into my mouth, rind and all. No sense in wasting it. As soon as I was hydrated, my body immediately decided to ruin it all and Jones for a cigarette. "Hey, Aunt Jean," I called up the stairs. "Thanks for the tea. I'm gonna step out for a smoke real quick. Don't forget Dawson will be over in a few hours." The only audible response was the steady creak of the rocking chair starting up again upstairs. If she had spoken, I no doubt would have heard her call out, "I'll wear my best, chickadee." I rolled a fresh cigarette and stepped outside with my Zippo. A faint, musty scent clung to the breeze like a fat tick, and as I looked out to the field, I remembered the rotted roots of some of the corn stalks. My stomach twisted into a double pretzel knot. It's one of the worst feelings in the world to know something is going terribly wrong, something that will affect you severely, and not be able to do anything about it. My crop, sown with my own blood, sweat, and diesel, was dying. As far as I could tell, I'd done nothing wrong or different than usual besides my land being host to the evil. At that moment, I told myself that no, I wouldn't sit back and watch it happen. I'd do everything short of black magic to save that corn. Surely Two-Tooth Steve had something helpful and questionably legal to offer me. As I shifted my gaze upward from the exceptionally nasty-looking patch, I saw him. The pig man had never been out in the day like this before. But there he was, standing with his hammer over his shoulder and staring at me with those inky eyes. He was an even worse sight to behold in clear light. I could see every greasy wrinkle and every pit where his skin settled wrong. I sat on the porch railing, lit the cigarette, and lifted it to my mouth. I needed it then more than ever. As I blew a cloud of smoke out of my nose, the pig man began to move. I looked on in stunned silence as he walked to the edge of the cornfield. We held eye contact for what felt like ages. The cigarette burned down to ash in my hand, and the wind whistling through the stalks was the only sound other than my heavy breathing. Was he going to run up here? Was this it? Would he charge me, pick me up, and chew me down to the bone? As my life flashed before my eyes for let's face it, I'm not counting anymore. All I could think of was Dawson, and how much it was going to suck for him to find my mangled corpse when he came over for dinner. I would have gone through the reverse 1,000 times if he didn't have to, even once. I couldn't deny that he was sweet. He didn't deserve to see shit like that. The near silence was suddenly broken when the pig man let out a squeal scream so loud that he leaned forward into it. Birds took flight in terror from the pines in the distance, and I jumped so hard that I fell forward and hit the ground 3 feet below. I clutched at my knee and groaned in pain. The pig man just watched me, making odd snuffling noises that might have been the pig equivalent of giggles. I pushed myself to my feet and started limping toward the cornfield with my skinned knee. That tore it. I was about to give this swine behind a piece of my mind. What the fuck is wrong with you, huh? Why do you like to torture me, you creep? Why can't you just leave? You aren't paying rent. Go somewhere else. I met him at the edge of the field and quickly realized that I'd never been this close to him. The stink of old blood overwhelmed the rotting corn scent, and I felt my breakfast threatening to come back for a visit. Slanted pig teeth, stained brown, poked out from a snout that looked like it was melting. His eyes sat even farther in the sockets than I'd initially thought, giving the whole thing the appearance of a cheap 2 sizes too big latex mask. His fingers were crusted with dirt, and his nails were bitten down to bloody quicks. One ear had begun to mold, and the other bore a small yellow livestock tag which I couldn't read. As I took it all in, a fly crawled in through his nostril and out of his eye. I thought faintly about running back to the house, but anger beat out fear. You need to find some other farmer to bother. I'm not taking your shit anymore. Without considering the consequences for longer than a second, I broke the barrier between us and stepped into the cornfield. The old blood smell grew fresh and overwhelming. All around me I could suddenly hear the tramping of hooves and the screaming of pigs, not oinking or squealing. This was a slaughterhouse cry. I tried to step back but froze when I heard something entirely different above the noise. "Leave, Newport, you have no place on this land," called out a male voice. Unlike everything else, it came from inside my head. It was harsh but familiar. It conjured a face and a name in my head, but I couldn't make either out. All I saw was blurry shapes and colors. The puzzle pieces that filled the gaps in my memories were lost in a wood chipper. I didn't know who was talking to me, but boy did I give them a piece of my mind. Fuck you. This land, this house, these animals all need me. This is my home. I belong here. The hoofbeats got louder and I felt something hard come down on my ankle. When I fell to the ground, all bets were off. Hit after hit, all over my body, pigs I couldn't even see ground their feet into my skin as they trampled all over me. I could feel the gritty dirt they left on me with each step, and I choked on the dust they kicked up. When the onslaught was over, not an inch of my skin was left unbruised and sore. The only thought in my mind was that I'd like to see Dawson try to put an ice pack on all this. Maybe that was just a coping mechanism, though. I staggered up to my feet, pretty sure my ankle was sprained to hell, and immediately fell back to my knees and puked. There wasn't a lot left in me to come up, but it still managed to make it out of my nose. I got up again and ran for the house, sparks of pain shooting up my leg as I hit the porch steps and coughed up more stomach acid. I took the stairs 2 at a time, racing down the hallway. I nearly had a head-on collision at high speed with the shower as I rocketed into the bathroom. I felt dirty and sick, and the countless bruises stung like wildfire. I stood in the cold stream of water, not even bothering to take off my clothes. Rivulets the color of rotten fruit swirled down the drain as I wept into my hands. My shirt stuck to me like pine tar as I struggled to pull it off. An indeterminate amount of time passed. It was only Dawson's voice that pulled me out of disassociation. I realized with some shock that I was so glad he was here. At some point I'd ended up on the bathroom floor. My injured ankle was still hanging over the tub's edge and the water was ice cold. "Hey, do you need some help there? I brought pie and I feel like the floor isn't the best place to enjoy it. I won't stop you if that's what you want, though. Where'd you get all those nasty bruises?" I just nodded, and he took that as permission to help me to my feet and wrap a towel around me. If he had any thoughts about my impromptu coming out, he didn't voice them. I'd never been that good at modesty, and he probably knew from the beginning. Seriously, though, what happened? He helped me into my room and made me sit down on my bed. I rubbed my swelling eye. I fell into my tractor. Dawson raised an eyebrow at me but didn't question it. He'd only been in my room a few times before that, and I was surprised by how completely unbothered by his presence there I had become. "This wardrobe looks like it leads to Narnia," he said, swinging the door open and looking through my collection of overalls and thrift store t-shirts. "Yeah, my great-grandfather made it. If you climb in there and stay long enough, it'll probably take you somewhere." Dawson snooped through my outfits, pausing to look at each one. "I think it would just take me to overall land. I swear, I've never seen so many pairs in one place." I couldn't help but grin. "You're one to talk, kitty cat princess socks." Dawson scoffed. Well, fuck me for having a sense of childlike whimsy every now and again. As I slipped on my boxers, Dawson tossed me my favorite overalls. Don't ask me how he knew. And the cheese is my passion shirt. The yellow fabric felt cool against my bruises. I looked around and it was like everything reset. I felt the tension drain out of me as I laid back on the soft quilt Aunt Jean had made for me not long after moving in. Yeah, you and your whimsy," I said with a long, cathartic sigh. Dawson looked at me before glancing at the CRT TV sitting on my dresser in front of the bed. Then he said the 4 best words he could have at the moment. "Want to play Mario Kart?" There are a few questions that you can almost never say no to, and that was one of them. That's some whimsy I can get behind. Dawson handed me one of the controllers before making me scoot over on the bed. "I know I said whimsy first, but can we stop now? It doesn't sound like a word anymore." "We could, but I don't think that would be very whimsical of us." Dawson nudged me in the ribs, enough to be annoying but not enough to aggravate my bruises. I stuck my tongue out at him. He tried to shove his finger in my nose. I faked biting at it. Once we got serious, for the next 30 minutes I kicked his ass at Mario Kart. Then we went downstairs. I pushed my fork around my plate as we sat at the kitchen table with a glass of milk and a slice of pie each. I didn't feel much like eating, but Dawson had baked it himself, so I took a few bites. It was delicious. Honestly, one of the best slices of apple pie I'd ever tasted. "I'm sorry I didn't have dinner ready. I didn't fall into my tractor." "I could have told you that," Dawson said through a mouthful of pie. "The pigman tried to tenderize me into the main course, and I just lost it after that, I guess. If you'll give me a bit, I can—" Dawson swallowed hard and thunked his fork down on the table. "The guy out in the field? He did this to you?" Dawson had never really asked about the pigman. Once he got the message that some weird shit just kind of exists around here, he quickly adapted to my method of just letting it be. But nothing besides the rot had ever really hurt me before. Not on purpose, anyway. Bees had almost put my eye out more than a few times. But chickens will be chickens. "Yeah, but—" Dawson stood up from the table and started toward the door. "Wait. Dawson, no." That asshole didn't even listen to me for a second. He threw open the kitchen door and started marching toward the cornfield like the next super soldier or something. I ran after him. "Dawson, the pigman has been here for a long time. He's bad juju. You saw what he did to me. I don't know what he'll do to you, so just leave him alone." I grabbed Dawson's shoulder and he stopped for a second. "I'm not going to try and body slam him, but he hurt you, and I'm about to make sure he gets the message that he's not going to do it again." With that, he shook me off and kept going. I followed helplessly after him, dreading the bloodbath that I was sure would come. Without a note of hesitation, Dawson walked into the cornfield and right up to where the pigman had retreated. He wasn't immediately run over by a stampede of pigs, but something heavy and tense was in the air. They both stood there for a minute, quiet and unmoving. Then Dawson stuck a finger out at him. "You leave my friend alone, you uncultured swine. If you ever lay a hand on him again, I'll punch you so hard you turn into vegan bacon." The pigman walked closer to him, closing the distance between them to maybe a foot. I cringed and tried to pull Dawson back, but he was solid and unshakable. He wasn't going anywhere. You won't touch him again. Do you hear me? Even with Dawson raising his voice, the pigman's droopy face remained expressionless. But to my horror, he raised a hand, ready to strike. Don't hurt him, please, he didn't mean it. Dawson got into a fighting stance, ready to fight what was clearly a losing battle if need be. I'd still root for him. Did too, I totally meant it. As the pigman's gigantic, greasy hand rose above his head, I prepared for the worst. I knew what those fists could do. I could remember sitting out on the porch with my mother when she was still with me, watching as the pigman snatched crows out of the air with his surprisingly agile hands, crushed their bodies in between his sausage-like fingers, and shoved their corpses into his dripping maw. The sight always made me nauseous enough to go back inside, but my mom only stared vacantly at him. "Show me what you got, pork chop," Dawson taunted, and boy, did Pigman deliver. Instead of whack-a-moling him halfway into the ground, he opened his fingers. Only then did I notice two things I hadn't before. That same musty carpet and dying plant smell in the air, and the loop of rope around his middle finger. The protection talisman hung from his hand, and Dawson and I both stared in gut-wrench shock. We both turned at the same time and met with the same horrible sight. A trail of dead grass and swollen flies led up to the porch, where the door was swung open. In the distance, I heard the sounds of hooves on wood and the clack of old teeth. I didn't really care about any of my belongings, but Aunt Jean was in there and I didn't know what this thing was capable of. It was time for me to make the dumb decision to protect the ones I loved. I sprinted toward the porch, Dawson hot on my heels. "Get out of my house, you poor excuse for a compost heap." I threw a hand out in front of Dawson as we made it inside, ready to take the brunt of the attack if this thing was still here. The kitchen was in ruins. The last bits of my food were scattered across the floor, growing fat chunks of green and white mold with worms and ants feasting on the remotely edible parts. Aunt Jean was standing by the stairwell, unharmed but with a smear of dark dirt across her dinner dress and looking madder than a mule munching on bumblebees. "Bastard," was all she said, in a deep masculine voice you'd imagine coming from a Navy SEAL and not a tiny old granny. I looked over to Dawson, who'd moved to examine what remained of the pie he'd brought. I almost wished I hadn't. The crust was dried out to hell, and maggots writhed around in what remained of the apple filling. I'd taken out entire hornets' nests and fed a grape to a spider as big as my hand. But maggots were the one thing I could not handle. "Nope. Fuck that," I said, stumbling back to where I couldn't see the little white fuckers. But that proved impossible because even the half-eaten slices left on our plates were swarmed with them. It took everything. Dawson was right. All the pantry doors were open and the fridge and freezer were barren. There wasn't a single morsel of edible food left in my house. But that wasn't what I cared about right now. I cared about the tremble in Dawson's lip and how his voice shook just a little. I knew he'd worked hard on that pie. He'd done it for me, and so few people did things for me. "Yeah, it did. It took your amazing pie and I'm gonna take its kneecaps." I stormed outside and shook my fist at the sky like I was making sure God herself was watching. "You come out here and face me, you fucking coward. I'm not going to let you hurt my friend or kill my crops. Do you hear me? Over my dead body." Apparently, the rot was ready to accept that challenge. I watched the trail of black wind its way out of the cornfield and up to where I stood. As it rose out of the ground, our eyes locked, and it had me right where it wanted me. I'm sure y'all want me to get to the action, and I will. But first I have to explain something. I have an irrational fear of teleportation. And before you ask, no, I don't piss myself when I watch science fiction movies. It goes deeper than that. I'm afraid of spontaneous displacement. It's one of those phobias that you're 99.99% sure will never happen, but it still stays tucked in the back of your brain. I'm afraid I'll go to sleep, close my eyes, or even blink and end up somewhere I'm not supposed to be, like in the middle of a dark forest at 3 in the morning. Or all alone on the top of Mount Everest, or maybe even an abandoned research bunker in Alaska, plagued by the evils of the SpongeBob SquarePants pilot episode. You can run from a monster, and you can hide from a killer. You can get out of the water or wake up from a nightmare. But what do you do when everything around you is suddenly wrong? What do you do when one minute you're cozy in your bed after a hard day's work, and the next you're standing, very awake, in the middle of a circle of mannequins in a decommissioned military base? All this to tell you that the rot didn't exactly have it right where it wanted me, but it could put me right where it wanted me. So it did. I only broke eye contact with it long enough to blink. My eyes opened and my worst nightmare was realized. I was somewhere else, and nowhere good. The darkness out in the desolate stretches of woods and farmland is something you never really get used to. It's like burnt pitch, deep black and thick enough to drown in. When you're out lost in it, it's the kind of thing that makes you pray for the sun to rise at 3 in the morning. I was standing on an empty, unfamiliar dirt road. It ran far past what I could see in both directions, and there wasn't so much as a tire track. I'd walked through the dark 1,000 times before back on the farm, and I like to consider myself a brave person, but like I said, this was different. The fear was so potent that I could feel it pulsing in my chest. My mouth was dry as a bone and my legs were locked in place. No direction was a good one. There was no escape. The sky through the trees was black and moonless, and the forest around me was dead silent, without even so much as a single chirp of a cricket. I closed my eyes tight and tried to slow my breathing. A light rain began to fall, somehow only making me feel more gross. It rolled down my skin in swollen droplets, along with beads of sweat and maybe a tear or two. Despite the rain, the air was stale, like the inside of a flooded crypt. I'd just brought myself away from the precipice of a cardiac event and panic attack super combo when the quiet night wasn't so quiet anymore. The sound was faint at first, but the uneven hoofbeats moving closer dropped my stomach like an astronaut roller coaster. They approached me slowly until they didn't. My legs finally unfroze as I turned and saw the rot galloping toward me with its diseased gait. Small pebbles and gravel stabbed into my bare feet, but I didn't care. This road had to lead somewhere, and wherever it was, maybe I could lose this asshole. I ran and ran, but was only met with more woods and more road. I wasn't getting anywhere, and the rot had gained on me. I could feel its sickly huffs of breath against my back as the rain began to strengthen. Then a voice. It sounded dry and dead, like it had traveled across a graveyard to my ear. "You are a fool!" It caught me off guard, enough that I missed a pothole and went careening into the mud. If the ground loves me so much, why doesn't it just marry me already? I flipped over onto my back as the rot approached, its jaw hanging like it would fall any second. Black bile ran out of the hole in its skull where its nose would have been. Its one good eye traded the milk of blindness for the bloodshot of anger. Flies buzzed around my head and tried to find a home in my nose, and I dug them out along with globs of red mud. It didn't save me from the smell, though, thicker than glue poured straight into my sinuses. Like a cornered animal, I bared my teeth in rage. The absolute nerve of this guy. Nose holes are sacred. And you smell like Oscar the Grouch's jockstrap. Taste my foot, you fuckmuffin. I delivered a hard kick to the bottom of its jaw, which sailed high and off into the thick brush beside the road with a satisfying crack. "Pop fly, motherfucker." As I sprung to my feet, it charged at me, screaming with half a mouth as its pale, fat tongue thrashed against its neck. Sharp pain radiated up from my ankle as I sprinted away. A creature of decay had no business with a jawbone that tough. At some point during my run, I blinked and was somewhere else again. I couldn't tell if I'd done something wrong at some point or was just doomed to the necessary function of my face circles. I was jerked to a stop by knee-deep water, almost falling face first. If I had known where I would have ended up next, I'd have taken the dirt road again 5 times over. My feet sunk into the black silt of a midnight bayou, and the air filled with sound, almost like someone had pressed play on a remote. The cacophony of wildlife didn't make me feel any better, though. The loudest noise was the territorial bellow of alligators. I'd lived near a bayou all my life, but this place felt vastly unfamiliar. Mother Nature is perfectly capable of creating her own dangers without the aid of supernatural entities who want to see the flesh fester off your bones. I rocketed straight past, being frozen in fear, and went immediately to fight or flight. I started in the direction of what I could only hope was land, muttering "please, please, please" under my breath. Not like the hungry mouth of a reptile would listen to anything I had to say. I only made it a few steps before the ground dropped from under me, bringing the water level to chest height. I saw spots as panic settled in. I know that most people say that's the worst thing to do in a situation like this, but it was my quickly shortening life, and I was going to panic as much as I pleased. Suddenly, the sounds around me all died, leaving only the voice again. "You duh, my poor." In the distance, I heard approaching splashes. Some black behemoth was steadily making its way toward me through the dark waters. Acting quickly, I sucked in a deep breath and sunk to just below my eyes. When in Rome, I guess. The beast's steps sounded entirely different beneath the water as it drew closer. Muffled mini-explosions echoed through the swamp to my waterlogged ears. When it reached me, all went truly silent. It stood high above the cypress trees, with a head the size of a school bus. It turned its snout down to stare at me, its one good eye glowing white-hot, like a scorching desert sun. The mangled jawbone sat low on its neck, as if it had put it back on like an ill-fitting necklace. "You challenge me to my fast little worm of man." It stayed there, staring at me, hooves as big as transfer truck tires unmoving in the muck. My lungs burned for air as my vision blurred. Hadn't anyone ever told it to pick on someone its own size? The need for air and the will to survive eventually outweighed my fear, and I surfaced with a gasp, just far enough to suck in much-needed air. Instead of snapping me up like I'd expected, the rod only laughed and stomped further into the bayou and, eventually, out of sight. Silence fell again, but not for long. It was quickly replaced by the bubbling uprush of water as innumerable corpses rose from the depths. Fowl, fish, lizards, and snakes, beavers and squirrels, deer, a black bear or two, even people. Everything that had lived in or around it had been reduced to macabre pool floaties, riddled with decomposition. The water churned just in front of me as something large and scaled appeared as the final rotten guest to this swampy pool party. It was the largest alligator I'd ever seen, faded from green to ashen gray. It was caked in algae and other hitchhiking plants, with open wounds crusted in yellow and red. Bile rose in my throat as I noticed how distended its belly had become. Rigor mortis makes balloons out of us all. I tried to take a step back, but I felt the water somehow dropping down even further in the direction I'd come from. A massive cottonmouth slid out of the gator's empty eye socket. As it slithered down its grimy snout, I noticed the single eye, glowing like tiny wormwood in the snake's face. Its mouth cracked open, and instead of fangs, all I saw was blackness. I will have, wad, I wan, I was sick of these party tricks. I picked the bastard up by the neck and flung it as far into the distance as possible. As if punishing me, I felt razor teeth sink into my leg below the water. I screamed and shut my eyes tight in agony. When I opened them again, I was somewhere else. I stood on my feet for all of about 2 seconds before crumpling to the dusty floor of the house I'd been put in. Blood gurgled out of the absolute mess that was once my leg. I could make out the outline of serrated teeth along the edge of the wound. As I stumbled toward the wall, I almost laughed when I remembered my dad had sworn he'd seen a bull shark in Hog Hollow Bayou the day before I was born. The only light was from a dim lantern on the wall, left on during the night to make trips to the bathroom easier. Something tall and rusted leaned against the other wall, and I hobbled over. It was a calf hammer, coming up to my shoulder with an abnormally large hammerhead. I rested my arm on it and shifted my weight, using it like a crutch. Surprisingly, it held. I knew that thing lurked in the darkness just beyond my field of vision. I knew that by going downstairs I was probably doing exactly what it wanted. But I was past the point of logic. My mind was playing only the greatest hits. Leave. Get out now. Run. And not much else. So I crutched over to the creaky landing and began to make my way down. I only made it about halfway before my injured foot came down wrong and sent me tumbling to the bottom of the stairs. I landed feet first with a sharp crack that put my mangled ankle out of commission for good. Bone peeked through the bloody skin, and I just lay there for a second as the popcorn ceiling spun around me. Not far out of my field of vision, I could hear the impatient stamp of a hoof, like my torture tour guide was telling me to hurry up. Well, whatever it had planned for me next, it could wait 2 cotton-picking fucking seconds. I stayed there until I mostly didn't feel like I was going to puke up my lungs. Then I took the hammer and struggled to my foot. I was standing in a kitchen that looked suspiciously similar to mine. That wasn't really what caught my attention, though. Laying more off the table than on, testing the strength it was clearly lacking, was an enormous horse. It didn't take long to recognize Hephaestus. He looked a bit younger back when he still could have gotten a job for Budweiser. 3 figures sat around him at the table, lips and teeth stained with blood. They were eating him. Large chunks of flesh were torn from his hide, leaking dark red all over the floor. "Hephaestus," I said weakly, "what have they done to you?" His head hung off the side closest to me, and as if in response to my question, he lifted it and blinked his eyes up at me. He was still alive. Half-digested apple pie joined the congealing blood all over the floor. The figures at the table, nothing but festering corpses now, looked up at me as if I was the rude one here for puking while they chowed down on one of my only friends. "Join us, Portia," croaked the woman. My skin crawled both at the tone of her voice and the use of my old name. I'd rather sit on the devil's lap on a Sunday morning. The largest corpse grinned at me, complete with the rattling grind of dry, dead teeth. You look starved, little hen, always looking starved. Come put some meat on your bones. I took a step back, and it felt like the entire room got so much smaller. All I could do was hope there was a door behind me as I inched away, and that this didn't become that one joke about 3 zombies, a queer and a half-eaten horse all stuffed inside a closet. The third figure opened his mouth to speak, but God, I couldn't. I just couldn't. I pressed my hands over my ears for all the good it would do and screamed louder than I ever had. Then I turned and ran, throwing myself into the door to the outside. I don't know how I was moving on my destroyed leg, but adrenaline really is one hell of a chemical. The outside was nothing but cornfield shrouded by low-hanging forest. Seeing corn in the middle of deep woods was an eerie sight. It didn't belong there. I didn't belong here. I fled in no particular direction, searching desperately for an opening that just wasn't there. The further I went, the more rotten the crops became. By the time I came to a break in the rows, my surroundings were little more than dried-out, weevil-infested husks. I walked into the middle of the round clearing, wheezing loudly as my lungs tried to catch up with all the running for my life I had been doing lately. Strange patterns were scratched into the hard-packed earth beneath my feet, and if this was a genuine crop circle, I would have happily taken an abduction over this nightmare. Probing included. Your pathetic rebellion does not faze me. Like a shitty sequel that nobody asked for, the rot crawled out of the corn. It moved low to the ground like a centipede, its joints making a horrible symphony of snaps and pops. Broken hooves cracked against dry dirt as it raced toward me. I felt something solid in my hands where it wasn't before. You and your little friend are pigs to the coos mixed slaughter. Your blood will fester and forgo wooden cracks until nothing is left of you, not even a memory. I took a step back, but I wasn't running away. Maybe that was the smart thing to do, but anger gets along much better with stupid. My fingers felt over the butt of my gun, a trusted ally. The rot must have sensed my next move because it charged at me much faster than it had been, lashing out like a cobra. I leaped into the air, narrowly avoiding the attack, but came down too soon. I felt the crunch of brittle spine under my feet as the rot let out a bellow of agony. I almost felt a little bad, except for the fact that I actually didn't at all. You want to talk about pigs? Welcome to the pen, asshole. Get chewed on. I whirled around and brought the gun stock down squarely on top of the bastard's skull, making a sound like a frozen watermelon being thrown off a roof. I didn't stop, though. I kept raising it and bringing it down until I saw the pale whites and grays of a brain long since used. One more time for good measure, and I closed my eyes with the force of it. As the butt of my gun shattered, I was standing in my own cornfield. My leg was sore but not broken or mangled like I'd expected. I looked down at the gun in my hand. I had hoped the stock would be in pieces, and I would feel this overwhelming sense of peace and victory. But no, it was intact, save for a crack down the middle where splotches of black growth were beginning to invade. Even after I'd bashed its brains in, it was still out there, and it wanted me to know it. Newport. Dawson and I locked eyes, and in the few seconds it took to blink the dust out of them, he had already made it over and yanked me off my feet. He held me bridle style and ran back into the house, slamming the door behind him and shoving a chair in front of it. Are you okay? What the hell was that? You were just gone. And then you were all the way over in the cornfield. I was so worried. Are you hurt? Where is the... What happened to... Are we going to... His voice was slowly replaced by a constant, high-pitched drone, flooding through my ears and blocking out all other sound. The shock must have been extended release because I spent the rest of that night in a haze. At some point, Dawson pressed a cuboid shape into my hand. It was a half-melted Rice Krispie treat, and I assumed it had spent most of the day in his crowded pockets. When my memory solidified, I was standing by the kitchen door. It was wide open, the cold knob firm in my grip. Dawson was sitting at the table, eyes bloodshot with a look of deep concern plastered on his tired face. A storm had rolled in, and mixed with the howling of the wind and the heaviness of the downpour, I could hear that same dry voice as it crooned Dawson's name. It was taunting me. You need to go. Dawson looked up at me. No. In the distance, odd shadows twisted just beyond the porch light's reach. Every so often it would flicker and the shadows would dare to climb up the stairs, retreating when it returned. The dawn was on its way. There was faint light in the east, but it wasn't coming fast enough. I want you to leave, Dawson. Go home to your parents. I hated how my voice shook like it was just another branch in the rain. The taste of iron filled my mouth as I chewed on the edge of my tongue. I'm not going anywhere, Newport. I won't leave you alone here. Not with that thing still out there. I like to consider myself a strong person. By design, farmers can't be anything but. Beyond that, I've seen things that would drive most people mad. I've watched the ones I love slowly fade away and simply kept on going. But the hold I had on the shitty string that kept me together was fraying. My nerves were fracturing at the hands of the poster child for mad cow disease. I'd tried in earnest to end that thing, and now it was laughing at me out in the night. I picked up the shotgun off the floor and leveled it at Dawson. He stood up, but unlike any sensible person, there was no alarm or fear in his face. My hands were shaking like crazy, but my fingers were steady on the stock and barrel of the gun, nowhere near the trigger. Want to talk about why you're pointing Alice at me right now? Did you give my gun a name? Dawson cocked his head and got that dumb smile from the first time I'd aimed a gun at him. Yeah, I don't know, I thought it suited her. Also, Newport Jr. would have gotten me drawn and quartered. An ugly noise between a laugh and a sob came out of me. Stop distracting me, you need to get out of here, I'm not asking. The sky roared above us, loud enough to shake the walls. Dawson's tone was annoyingly even. Somewhere deep down, I wanted him to yell at me. I craved an all-out screaming match, and I hated myself for it. The evil presence infecting my land was having more of an effect on me than I could fathom. Newport, I'm not just going to abandon you when you're in danger. It called out his name again as lightning arced across the sky. The stock of my shotgun began to crumble in my hands, breaking apart like soaked wood chips. Don't you hear that? You're in fucking danger too. It's not playing games anymore. It knows that I care about you more than I care about myself. We were both silent for a few moments, staring at each other. I'd never seen a look of surprise that strong on Dawson's face before. I couldn't believe what I'd said, but it was true. There was no taking it back. You can leave. I can't leave, not again. You have a wonderful family and so much potential, and I don't want to die, and the animals need me, but let's face it, in the grand scheme of things, it wouldn't be some massive loss. Even with the barrel still trained on him, Dawson walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. The gun poked into his chest, but he didn't seem to care. Just go. I'll survive, and besides, everyone leaves me eventually. I lowered the gun, nearly dropping it. Dawson's other hand rested on my opposite shoulder, and then suddenly I was being pulled into a hug. I could tell his mom had passed down her anaconda grip to him. I'm ashamed to say that I dead-fished the hug just a little. Fine, I'll go, but I'm not leaving. Don't you dare think that's what this is. I'll be here the second you need me. I want us alive, but if I had to be dead, I'd want to be dead with you. Losing is better with company. He pulled away, but left his hands on my shoulders. If you die, I'm gonna kill you. I laughed, and it sounded worse than a cat barking. Dawson took my hand in his and pressed our thumbs together. And for the record, the world would suck without you in it. I held his hand in mine for a second longer before shaking him off. I tried to sound firm and serious, but it just came out soft. Stop lying to me and just get in your big red truck and go the hell home. Before he had time to say something smart-ass in response, I herded him out the door, Alice in tow. But she wasn't an empty threat anymore. She was an admittedly ineffective defense against what was out there in the darkness. I walked back to the porch and lingered there, watching him wind up the road and making sure he didn't pull any tricks. Out in the darkness, I could hear another dry laugh. If you hurt him, I'll make sure that there isn't even scorched earth left of you. Thunder growled above me as the wind whipped through the loblollies. It was a challenge. It was a real gag that it could goad me all I wanted. But the minute I got an attitude back, I was taken on a safari through the 9 circles of hell. I said nothing. I'd made my point. As I watched Dawson finally turn off my driveway, that's when I saw it. Underneath my feet, the porch steps were covered with mold. Things got a little foggy after that. My mind was filled with a singular purpose, to get rid of it. There's one last thing I've mostly neglected to mention until now. It's true that I've never paid a dime of rent on this house. It goes back in my family for generations. So why do I have a landlady? I don't talk about the landlady that much out of some odd respect for her privacy. She's a very guarded being, almost certainly not human. But she takes care of me and the farm while still giving me the freedom to do pretty much whatever I please. There have been times when she's let me know I've done something she doesn't like. When I used to leave out mousetraps, Somehow they'd always end up in my shower or on my pillow in just the right place that I wouldn't see it until it was too late. It didn't take me long to get the hint, and I started leaving out the no-kill traps after that. Ever since it was just my mother and me, we've had an unspoken agreement. On the first night of every month, I set a basket or two full of eggs on my front porch, and in the morning, it's replaced with enough fresh food to last the month and proof of paid bills. She even pays for my internet and cable. Not long after that all started, I started calling it the offering. It sounds cooler that way. I'd seen the landlady once before the mega chicken attack. The night after my mother left, I sat on the porch all night and cried out for her, hoping against hope that I'd see her walking back up the road. When I wandered far enough away from the house to peer into the woods behind it, I saw her. The landlady cast a shadow in the full moon that was way larger than she was, her silver eyes glowing out into the darkness. She didn't come any closer, but she stood there the whole night. I could feel her presence, even when I couldn't directly see her. The message was easy to grasp. She didn't want me to feel alone. She's a mysterious entity, but she's a kind one. The point of my mentioning this now is that I had not a single scrap of food left, and with my fear of leaving the farm and coming back to it in ruins, there was only one place I could get it. But when Dawson left, that was the furthest thought from my mind. I don't know how long I stayed there on those stairs. I couldn't tell you if you put a gun to my head, but I do know it was too long. I ran into the house and frantically grabbed chemicals. Then I dropped to my knees on the porch and didn't come up. Hours passed. The only thing I can recall was the smell of bleach and the burning underneath my fingernails. The time stretched out into days. I slept if and where I dropped. I didn't eat. The only water I had was from the cold rain on my face. Dawson faded in and out of my perception, but I couldn't be sure if he was real or one of the rot's newest tricks. He told me to come with him. He told me I needed to eat. He told me I'd never looked this sick. Each time I told him no. I couldn't leave, and the mold had to come off. Eventually, I realized I was out of bleach. I had probably been out of it for a while, but the pungent smell lingering on my skin had fooled me into scrubbing rawly at the wood for time immeasurable. I stood for maybe 2 seconds before collapsing back onto the porch. The entire thing was now covered with fat patches of black. I pulled myself forward and into the open door with bloody hands and bruised knuckles. Once I felt the smooth kitchen floor underneath my aching limbs, clarity washed over me. I was dying. I was lying here on the floor, starving to death. I lifted my head just enough to turn it, and that's when I saw it. Beside the front door sat a basket full of eggs. They were speckled with black spots, and some of them were that same bright red. Clearly bad. That thing was throwing off the balance, even for the girls. Still, placed at the top were the few good ones from the clutch, and attached was a simple note with flowery handwriting. It was written upside down, but I could still pick out the words after focusing my swimming vision. Don't be stubborn, chickadee. You know what you have to do, and I did. I finally did know what I had to do. I took the basket and used the wall to push up to my knees. Eggs and trembling arm, I slid across to the doorway. They fell from my hand the second I made it out to the porch, rolling across it and down the stairs. Several of them broke in the process. Man, Dawson, if you were here, I said in a loud, delirious voice, you'd have probably said something like, wow, Newport, excellent job there. I started to laugh, but then I wasn't laughing anymore. What precious water I still had was escaping from my eyes like it was late for the water cycle. When I still had my family, I used to enjoy being alone every now and again. They say you don't know what you've got until it's gone. I'd hide in my closet with a book or daydream underneath my bed. Now I'd give almost anything to see my father's heavy work boots walking up beneath the bedskirt. Another one of my mother's fleeting special interests had been the ocean. Marine biology, oceanography, maritime travel, you name it. For a few months it was all she would talk about. I remember my father sitting with her in the night and enthusiastically soaking in every single odd fact or long tangent she had to give. I know he loved her. I listened too. Laying in bed at night when things were a little too much, I'd close my eyes and imagine I was somewhere else. Surprisingly, this was my one exception to the teleportation fear. One of the things I'd heard about in my mother's passionate rambling was Point Nemo. Point Nemo is, statistically, the loneliest place on Earth. It's not an island, but a set of coordinates in the Pacific Ocean known as the oceanic pole of inaccessibility. Often the closest living people are on the International Space Station when it passes by overhead. Someday the U.S. government will crash it into those same waters, I'd picture myself there, bobbing up and down in the waves and enjoying the relative quiet. I'd see nothing but calm horizon stretching out forever, and the full moon and stars above me. I was utterly alone, and that was just how I wanted it. I was there again now, but this time it was different. It was pitch black, with no moon and no stars. All I could see were the monstrous waves moments before they rolled over my head. Dead machines groaned beneath me, desperate to return to the cosmos they had fallen out of. I kicked and fought desperately against the tide, but couldn't stay up long enough to take even a single breath. The water was freezing and boiling all at the same time, and I was drowning. I was alone, and what's worse this time, it was entirely my fault. I wondered briefly who was going to be the lucky person to find my waterlogged corpse. When I opened my eyes, it all stopped. I hadn't realized they'd closed. My head rested at an uncomfortable angle, and I could barely see anything around me, but I could see an enormous shadow fall over me. "Just get it over with," I mumbled. "There are other people in this McDonald's drive-thru, you know." The voice that responded sounded like the whisper of the wind as it passed through northern trees, and also like the howl of a coyote as it echoed down a southern canyon. "Easy, child." Goosebumps immediately rose up on my arms as it finally dawned on me in my sorry state. It was her. She'd never spoken to me before. It was only right to speak back, but I didn't have time for small talk. "I don't have any more food. I'm starving. That thing took it all. You have to have seen it by now. It took all my food, and it's killing my crops and screwing with my animals. It wants to run the farm into the ground. It wants to watch me and this farmhouse rot and return to the earth." I didn't know how I knew, but I did. I hated to beg, but I was quickly running out of options and even faster out of time. "Please, you have to help me. I'll give you double eggs next time, I swear. I don't want to die. You have to know how to get rid of this thing." As she walked closer, silent as a doe, I could just barely see her in my bleary vision. Her dark cloak pooled around where I assumed she had feet, and I could see a few wild strands of branch blonde hair curling out from the hood. As I looked up, I beheld a sight my fading sense could barely comprehend. A pair of deer antlers grew out from beneath the hood of the cloak, 8 feet tall and strung with vines, leaves, and feathers. The tips were painted with dried blood, as well as the runes across the length of them. The base of each was as thick as my wrist. She touched the back of my head with thin, calloused fingertips. And then I was gone. When I came back to the land of the living, it was surrounded by vegetables. The morning sun glittered off the skin of baskets full of fresh produce and the clean, solid wood of my porch. A wonderful smell filled my nose, and I tracked it down to a carefully wrapped piece of cooked venison. I didn't think. I just ate. Moments like that one make me so glad that almost no one ever comes out here. If someone had walked up the path to my porch right then, they would have seen what appeared to be a dirty gremlin going to town on the liver of a small child. My stomach ached a little, but I managed not to puke. Water dribbled down my chin as I drank from the small wooden bowl left out next to a bag of salt. I looked closer at the burlap sack, with salt printed in faded black letters across the front and filled to the brim with large black salt crystals. A note was attached to the outside, and in faint, formal handwriting it read, "This one is on the house." Even if I could carry it inside, I didn't have the slightest idea what it was for. I was just glad the landlady cared enough to give me a hand. "Thank you," I called out into the dawn, hoping she could hear me wherever she was. Then I crawled on my hands and knees back into the house. I was feeling a little better, but it was still hard to breathe for some reason, and the vertigo was worse than a Barbie head in a blender. I'd pulled myself halfway into the kitchen when I heard that firm, familiar voice. It spoke with that soft southern drawl, the one I'd somehow never picked up. "Newport." I kept crawling forward, pushing the door closed with my foot. "It's just another trick. Ignore it and it'll go away." "Newport." I tried to focus on the task at hand. I needed to get the food inside. Maybe Aunt Jean would lend me a hand? No, she'd done enough for me lately as it was. I might be able to get a rope and have Hef help me, but the last time I let him in the house, I was cleaning up horse piss out of the carpet for 3 hours straight. Dawson wasn't here, and I wasn't about to. "Newt." My hand came down again as I tried to pull myself forward, but instead it landed in a puddle of red and slipped out from underneath me. The stench of meat and iron overwhelmed me as my head hit the floor. Blood. It was all over the floor and all over my hands and all over him. He was calling out to me, but he wasn't. He wasn't breathing, and I could see his brain inside his skull. All I could think of was I thought people's brains were supposed to be pink, not gray. His eye stared at me from his cheek, and it looked like one of the animals had a good chew on it. The berry basket fell from my hand and hit the ground. Might as well have been a bomb going off. I screamed and screamed and screamed. Over the ringing in my ears, I heard footsteps running into the barn. My mom grabbed me by the shoulders, shaking me and wailing at me to tell her what happened. What happened? What happened? I don't know what happened. Look at you, Newt. You're sweating like a pig. The smell was gone, but I was still lying on the floor. A pair of bare feet stood right in front of me, toenails painted blue emerald. I rolled over, ready to attack with little more than infant kicks, but instead, I looked right into the eyes of a ghost. Pigs don't sweat, you know, I told him. He crouched down to my level and smiled. Yeah, and you got about as much sense as one. Hell, you ain't got the sense that God gave a goose. Out there scrubbing like you're trying to put Lady Macbeth out of a job, and you ran off the only real friend you got in this place. It wasn't surprising that all that mold has just been another one of the rot's tricks. Maybe this was too, but fuck, I didn't care. I was buying like a squirrel in a nut factory. After everything that's happened, you're really just gonna stand here and bully me, huh? His hand ruffled through my hair and my chest ached more than it already was. Shaw, kid, I'm messing with you. A little, at least. You're my whole world, but you have to listen to what I'm telling you. You can't do this alone. You're as strong as an ox and twice as mean when you want to be. But this is growing beyond that. This is something you can't handle on your lonesome, and I know you're thinking right now, fuck you, I can take care of myself. But deep down, you know I'm right. He always knew me so well, and I guess that was by design. Well, what about Aunt Jean? He crossed his tree trunk arms and rolled his eyes. Aunt Jean is a sneeze away from a pile of dust and a set of dentures. And you and I both know that I can't stick around. As soon as you get your feet out under your brain, I'll be gone. I looked away, staring at kitchen chairs and a floor that desperately needed to be mopped. He was right, and I kinda hated it. He sat down next to me and pressed something in my hand. It was cold and square, and I could feel a brand new crack running through it. You know I only give you shit because I love you, Newt. I love you more than anyone ever loved anything in this life. Always remember that. And for Pete's sake, and the dog's too, call that boy. You're right, he's in danger, but you'd both be better off being in danger together. I held the phone in front of my face. A long hairline crack ran in between me and the other person on the lock screen photo, laughing at something I didn't remember. My mom took that picture. I dialed Dawson's number and hovered my finger over the call button. I glanced back up at him one more time. Hey, Diesel, wait. Yeah, Newport. I swallowed around the golf ball lump in my throat. Don't go. I expected him to tell me again that he had to, but instead he simply said, I won't. And it was the most beautiful lie I'd ever heard. The phone didn't get a chance to ring more than once before the front door burst open. I looked up and he was gone. Like he'd never actually been there in the first place. The events of the last few minutes grew filmy in my brain as Dawson charged inside. Newport, are you okay? Wait, that's a dumb question. I shifted enough to catch his gaze and fuck, my chest was really hurting. His face was red and his hair was filled with straw. Not really, how did you get here that fast? Did you carjack a scarecrow? Not exactly, no. It was then that I noticed the look on his face. He looked incredibly guilty and smelled like horse. No, he smelled like barn. Have you been staying in my fucking barn? Dawson scratched the back of his head but said nothing. You have, haven't you? You never actually left. Dawson threw his hands up like he was the one who got to be exasperated here. I was worried about you. I knew you wanted space, but I was terrified that if I left completely, that thing would take advantage of you being alone. Also, Aunt Jean got our backs last time, so I figured it was my turn to take care of the animals. You didn't even notice when I drove my truck right back up the road, Newport. You wouldn't eat. You wouldn't sleep. Something was seriously wrong. I heard you screaming, so I ran out here, but then it stopped. I wanted to wait until you called me. It sounded like you were busy. If Dawson had looked in and seen anything, he didn't mention it. I appreciated that. I opened my mouth about to give him a light chewing out, but I didn't get that far. All that came out was a pained groan as my chest and sides yelled at me with the fury of 1,000 suns. just as I pulled off my shirt and realized the horrible error I'd made. The absolute last person I wanted to see right at that moment came down the stairs. I'd never seen Aunt Jean look so angry. She didn't say a word, but instead pointed a bony finger at the binder I'd been wearing for way too long, let's put it that way. Then she pointed upstairs, and I knew there was no room for argument. She's right. You haven't taken that off since you got corn teleported, have you? I shook my head and started a mental list of all the fucked up things that could be happening inside of my ribcage right now. Dawson came over and lifted me to my feet. I'd say you go shower, and I'll get all the food in, but I don't think you're gonna make it up there without me. We'll get it inside after. I knew if I argued, Aunt Jean would skin me alive, so I leaned on Dawson as he helped me upstairs. Once we got into the bathroom, I felt confident enough to stand on my own, so I left the bathroom door open as Dawson sat against the opposite wall in the hallway. All I could see of him was his hand placed firmly on the floor just in view from the doorway, and even that small reminder of his presence reassured me. Well, might as well get this over with. As I gingerly took the binder off, I could already see and feel the damage. A rainbow of bruises ran around my ribcage and collarbone, and broken skin in a few places. Breathing still hurt, but I was reasonably sure all my ribs were intact. How bad is it? Scale of 1 to 10? Oh, I don't know. Probably somewhere between 1 and 10. Definitely a number. Newport. I sighed and started cleaning out the cuts. At the rate things were going, I was going to have to go rob an urgent care. It's not great, but I'll live. I've been through just so much worse in the past week. This is nothing. Dawson drummed his fingers against the floor. Not being able to keep his hands still was a telltale sign that he was nervous. As I glanced in the mirror, I swore I saw something. Moving? It looked like a vein was bulging out on the side of my sunburnt neck, but that didn't seem right. I knew high blood pressure and I were on a first-name basis, but this was ridiculous. You say that like you're trying for the high score. I'm not, but if I die, make sure they put winner on my tombstone. Dawson snorted and said something back, which I'm sure was just as witty, like, I'm going to put loser on there, and you won't be around to stop me. But I didn't hear it. I was focused on the bulge in my skin that was moving up my jaw and onto my face. My sinuses began to ache and my eyes watered. As it reached my cheek, my right nostril began to stretch. Something long and black slid out my nose, stretching it to the size of a silver dollar. The pain was excruciating, and I could feel my sinus cavity cracking with the pressure. As soon as I realized it was that same water moccasin from before, I froze on instinct. I stood stone still while it slithered around my neck and around my face, just like when I was little and a bumblebee would land on me. The snake stopped just above my temple and made eye contact with me. Then it opened its mouth, and unlike last time, it bared a perfectly ordinary set of fangs at me. When it sank those fangs into the soft flesh of my right eye, I felt it burst like a water balloon. I stumbled back and yelped. For a moment, I felt the sensation of blood running through my fingers as I grabbed at the socket. Fuck. Literally get out of my head, you dick. Dawson peeked into the bathroom, looking alarmed, and I just clutched at my eye. It had only hurt for a second, but the memory of the pain was fresh and natural. My nose was also back to its original bruised but unbroken state. The rot hadn't caused any lasting damage for a while. Maybe with the talisman I found hung back up outside, it couldn't do more than get into our minds. What did you see? I swallowed and lowered my hand. My eye was a little swollen, but not poison swollen. No, Snake. Dawson nodded, like that needed no further explanation. Whatever you saw, it wasn't real. I mean, it was, but it also wasn't. It's all tricks. Well, I guess we'll find out for sure if my eye falls out. I pulled off the overalls covered with days' worth of bleach stains and stepped into the shower. It soothed my bruises, and I'd never been happier to be standing under ice-cold water. I wouldn't worry about it, dude. You'd look great with an eye patch anyway. The minutes melted by into an indiscernible mush, but this time, for all the right reasons, I let the water rinse all the nagging thoughts away until my brain was like an empty tin can rattling down a dirt road. Hey, Newport, can we, talk for a second? For some reason, Dawson chose to have our most important conversations while I was in the shower. Surprisingly, it was the place that got the best cell reception, and we'd had the obligatory "how do you feel about trans people" conversation while he was still recovering from his broken wrist. If you've been paying attention this far, I'm sure you can venture a guess as to how he responded. We both knew I was hard of hearing from years of frolicking with tractors, but he took the huh and what did you say like a champ. Though it was one of the million and one little things about him that mildly annoyed me, it was much better than the knocks on the floor and whispers from the shower head I used to endure, like my bathroom was haunted by the ghosts of showers past. Yeah? What is it? He hesitated a little, and I could hear the unsure squeak of his boot on the floor. I was worried I was in for a soft lecture about any number of things I'd been doing wrong, but as usual, Dawson surprised me. I'm really sorry for camping out in your barn like that. I know it was kinda creepy. I wasn't actually that mad at him. Sure, I was irritated that he hadn't listened to me, but a small part of me was almost glad he'd been there the whole time. You and I both know that my definition of creepy is way out of whack, and you camping out in my barn barely even charts. Besides, I understand why you did it. Doesn't annoy me any less, but I get it. He breathed a loud sigh of relief, and it felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders, too. Besides, I added, there's no one I'd rather have squatting in my hayloft. Except maybe Markiplier, but you and I both know that's never happening. Dawson scoffed. As if I'm ever doing that again, man. Your horse farts like a nuclear reactor. I'm lucky my nose didn't boil right off my face and I grew up around sheep. That was one hell of a point, and it made me laugh so hard that I got water up my nose, which made us both laugh even more. It felt so good to laugh, it was a productive way to air out some of the hysteria that was still hanging around. After somewhat getting it together, Dawson went to grab me something to wear. If I hadn't known it before then, I knew it now. I'd have more luck getting rid of a leech with separation anxiety than ever shaking Dawson. I couldn't make myself be anything but happy about it. After giving me the loose tank top and overalls a size too big that Aunt Jean practically forced on him, we went downstairs. All the food had been moved inside and hell, even put away, and I was going to give Aunt Jean a good kick in the granny panties for doing all that for us. You need to eat. I'm cooking, don't argue with me. I walked across the kitchen and opened the fridge. It was 2 whole weights and a goat on top of it all off my back to see it full again. You can, but I'm helping. That's what my mom and I always did when we were at odds. She'd get me to help her make bread. I know we're not really at odds anymore, but I'm still gonna help. You know, we still could be at odds if you want. We can start with the monstrous way you eat citrus. My mama always says we should never waste anything, but God, a man has limits. I snatched an orange out of the fridge and took a big bite out of it. I'd keep my mouth shut, or I might have to see how you'd taste with the peel. Probably like rotten apples and sheep's wool. Dawson rolled his eyes and reached over me, grabbing a piece of meat wrapped in paper and butcher twine. I'd make you fry bread, but you have to wait and have my mama's. I still can't make it quite as good as she does. Every day she asks me when you're going to come over. I grabbed the vegetables and started cutting. It didn't seem like we were really following a recipe. Like most things, I was winging it. If we survive whatever this is, I'll come over, even if it's just for dinner. I promise. After cooking in comfortable silence, we sat down together and our bowls were filled with mutton and stewed vegetables. I ate like a sickly, starved Victorian child, but halfway through my last mouthful, I realized Dawson was staring at me. There was something in his eyes, something I couldn't place. I wanted to tell him to take a picture, it would last longer, but instead I said something much different. I'm sorry for pointing a gun at you, and for a lot of things, really. I know I've been a shitty friend more than once. Dawson laughed softly. I'd never heard him laugh like that before. Yeah, remember when you puked on me after eating that rotten apple? I crossed my arms and looked away, embarrassed despite myself. Look, I had to do it, okay? It was for the plot. Sure you did, you're lucky you didn't get botulism poisoning. I looked back at him and lowered my arms. He was smiling ear to ear, that strange look in his eyes and flush in his cheeks back in full force. But seriously, I'm sorry, I just want you to know that I appreciate you being here, I really, really do. Even if I don't act like it sometimes. Even if I act like the world's biggest asshole most of the time. I'm not used to having friends. I'm bad at this. You're not bad at anything. He said it so softly I barely heard it. The smile fell from his face, but not in an unpleasant way. His eyes grew a size. I really appreciate having you here too, Newport. You're not a bad friend. You're a really great friend, actually. My only friend. He reached over and put his hand on mine. My intrusive thoughts had always told me Dawson only stuck around out of pity or some sense of obligation. But right then I knew for sure that none of it was true. Dawson needed me. and as much as he did, I needed him twice over. He'd brought back my loneliness, but in the same breath, he'd also cured it. Who could ask for more than that? I think he had something else to say, but I'll never know because the air filled with low, sickly gurgles as patches of black spread up from the leg of the table and onto the top. I jumped up, throwing myself in front of him, and the rot was upon us. Death is quiet. Humans are what make it loud. I'm sure you've been to at least one funeral in your life, whether you barely remember it or it just happened yesterday. If the latter is the case, my condolences to you. Loss is a universal experience. Almost everyone has been in a graveyard before. I remember picking at the grass as they buried my grandfather, the sun beating down on my pigtail braids and making me sweat through the sundress my mother put me in. Little black bahia grass seeds clung to my fingers as they lowered him into the ground. Graveyards are mostly silent. Besides the hushed whispers and sobs of people, and the faint sound of birdsong and wind through the dry trees, nothing stirs. It all rolls beneath the heavy silence like water under a fish trawler. When you're alone, paying your respects to people you don't remember or people whose loss makes you forget how to live, it's even quieter. Like the world around you has died too. Rot isn't like that. Decay is loud, hot, gross, and putrid. It's like bad sex. It makes your skin crawl off your spine and melt away as your organs turn to soup. It turns your bones into yellow twigs and sends the maggots and worms and God knows what else to feast on what's left. Like whipped butter spread onto toast. Rot howls and shakes until the wooden box or shallow hole that holds it collapses and leaves pockmarks in the thirsty dirt. In our case, rot slammed its cracked hooves against the table as it bellowed out a war cry in my kitchen. I was only able to shield Dawson for a moment, crying for him to look out before he shoved me to the side. The rot lunged from the table and connected its front hooves to his collarbone, sending him crashing into the wall. His head snapped to the side at an odd angle as the wood splintered, and he twitched for a moment before letting out a loud groan and slumping to the floor. He wasn't dead, but blood ran down the side of his head like streaks of melting ice cream. I threw myself without hesitation into its back, pummeling my fists into its spine, making dry snaps and cracks. It wrapped its lower half, suddenly longer, against my waist and slingshotted me into the kitchen door. The wood held, but the glass shattered all over me, landing in my hair like a shitty crown. Dawson had disappeared, and I sincerely hoped he had gone somewhere safe. As the rot scrambled toward me, its jaw unhinged and a long, pale tongue fell out of its mouth and dragged along the floor. I staggered to my feet, and it froze. I stared it down with all the fury and bravery I had left, which was a lot. Maybe it actually was thinking about going away. Maybe it knew I wasn't scared. I watched in horror as the rot rose up toward the ceiling, slimy and decomposed skin folding out like a waterlogged accordion as its bones rearranged underneath. When it was done, it looked down at me from a full 7 feet high with 2 extra legs. Its fly-infested ears brushed my ceiling. My legs began to move on their own, walking me around the towering monstrosity as its cow lips pulled back over its dark teeth. Warm food, rotted into the soil. Newport, I wanted to puke when it said my name, but my body desperately held on to what little food it had been given recently. The rot clacked its teeth together and shambled forward with unsteady weight, like a deflating tube man. My back hit the table, and when it leaned in, it ran its cold, fat, and dripping tongue over my face like an affectionate dog. I couldn't stop myself, I screamed, and that's when I heard the pounding footsteps coming downstairs. Newport! Duck! I was definitely at the edge of going into shock, but Dawson's voice brought me out of it just enough to drop to the floor. I watched as he leaped over the table and grand slammed the stock of Alice right into the side of the rot. The splitting sound it made as chunks of wood flew in every direction was euphoric, but not nearly as much as the rot's distorted moos of agony. Dawson hit it again, this time in the head, and it sprawled over and into the wall, exploding like overripe fruit into hundreds of tiny patches of mold. They crept down the walls and into the baseboards, slowly disappearing. The adrenaline flooded out of me, and I collapsed to the floor in a heap. Dawson ran over, dropping Alice and pulling me up enough to sit in one of the chairs. Blood was drying all the way down from his hairline to the collar of his shirt. The side of his face was covered with cuts and scratches, and he was limping a little. I checked his eyes and asked him all the obligatory questions about my fingers, the date, and the president. Besides the visible injuries, His impromptu trip into the wall hadn't seemed to do any lasting damage. I grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him as hard as I dared, given what had happened to him. "Stop saving my life." He pulled a look that was a little indignant but mostly amused. He chuckled and I grimaced. "You can't tell me to stop caring about you. Stop almost dying and I'll stop saving your life. Until then, get used to it, buddy." I stared at him for a second and he stared right back. Then I jumped up and wrapped my arms around him. I couldn't come close to his python hug, but I tried my hardest. Dawson grunted in surprise, but then he went, "Oh," like someone had just handed him a tiny, unwashed, adorable kitten. I rolled my eyes as they filled with tears. "It doesn't stop. It never fucking stops. It's going to be back. It's always going to be back, and I can't get through this without you. I just can't." He was right. Without you, it'll never end. Dawson rubbed my back and held me close in his arms. He smelled like salt and stewed apples and pine. A feeling of utter safety washed over me as he pressed my head into his shoulder. "I told you, Newport, I'm not leaving you. I'll never leave you. I promise. We're going to figure out how to end it together. Night of the Living Burger doesn't stand a chance as long as we have each other." Both of us jumped at a noise from outside. It was a small clatter, like a stone hitting a wall. I grabbed what was left of Alice and shoved Dawson behind me. He tried to switch us around again, but I didn't let him this time. I ran through the front door and found one of the last things I wanted to see right then. The protection talisman lay on the porch. The rope unwound to nothing and the crystal split into 100 tiny pieces. We weren't safe anymore. No wonder it had jump-scared me in my own kitchen. Fuck. Dawson picked up what remained of the gem he could and it crumbled to dust. He looked out at the road and then back at me with a heavy air of nausea. I think I'm going to have to go back to my parents. We don't have anything here to protect us both. I'll give you my necklace until I get back." I'd been reluctant the first time he did it, but it just wasn't happening a second time. Not when that thing was out there, while it crawled around on 6 legs like an insect and recited my name perfectly. Number absolutely not. Frosty the Snowman is selling popsicles in hell before that's happening. Besides, I think I might have something that can help us. I don't know how well it will protect us from whatever this is, but it's worth a shot. Dawson seemed unsure, but he agreed to go up there with me. We climbed up to the bathroom and made a detour to clean up Dawson's horror movie makeup. Then I grabbed the attic hatch, Dawson following on my heels like a puppy. You know, I've never been up here. I always wondered what that hatch was. Kinda weird to have one in the bathroom. I went to answer, but Dawson held up a hand. "No, don't tell me. This is the actual entrance to Overall Land, isn't it?" I pulled the hatch down and a cloud of dust floated down, sprinkling into my hair along with what glass I couldn't shake out. Even if I came up here every day, it would still be just as dusty. There was something about the attic that was perpetually forgotten. "Oh no, I should have told you about this before, Dawson. Shame on me. It's actually an express passageway to your mother's bedroom." Dawson scoffed and began climbing the rickety ladder. Maybe it wasn't the best time for jokes, but they were our bad coping skills, and we were going to use them however the hell we wanted. As if you could bag my mom. I went up right behind him, the wood trembling underneath our weight. The smell of moth-eaten clothes and milky mildew filled my nose, nostalgic and sad at the same time. "Who said I was after your mom, Dawson?" I watched the gears turn in his head in the man-made darkness. Then he let out a bark of a laugh. "Oh, you're weird for that one, Newport. So weird." We shuffled through the clutter, purpose momentarily forgotten. "Oh, you don't have to be mad that I'm madly in love with your—" "Hey, what's this?" Dawson held out a framed photograph. A gold band ran around the outside, and inside I sat among the parts of a soon-to-be-built chicken coop. That summer, our old one had been destroyed by a tornado. I'd been so devastated by the loss that my dad had taken me out and let me pick out a new chick for the coop. Bluebells poked up from the ground in small clumps around the picture's edges. "Is that who I think it is?" I looked close, not that I had to, and nodded. "Yep, that's good old Beelzebub." I took the photo and ran my fingers along the outer edge. It was unnaturally cold, like it had been pulled out of the grave. "Minnie Bees is adorable, but that's not what I meant. Is that you?" It was a question we both knew the answer to, so I wasn't really sure why he asked it. The little girl that was and wasn't me wore a too large sun hat and a pair of dirty pink overalls. Her horse shirt stained with lemonade and salty dog. My grandmother made ice cream herself sometimes. Salty Dog was a French cream base with a bit of peanut butter, chocolate chunks, pretzels, and salt. My childish grin was frozen in time, missing 2 front teeth and framed by long waves of black hair. The conviction behind it faded not long after my father took that picture. Dawson looked at it for a long time, then at me. I trusted him more than I'd ever trusted someone else in a long time, but that intrusive fear still remained in the back of my mind. I braced for the words despite myself, but he caught me off guard. "Are you happy, Newport? I mean, I know that obviously you're not totally happy right now, given the circumstances, but I mean, you know. With your identity, it had been longer than I could remember since someone had asked me that." I touched the bruises below my ribcage lightly and smiled. The answer snuck up on me. "Yeah, I am. Especially with you around." "Good. And for the record, I never thought a thing about it, not even for a second." His smile matched mine, and I sat the photo down gently in an open box. Most of them were open. After my dad was gone, my mom spent a lot of days up here, touching and crying over her pieces of the past. The red mold had begun to grow mushrooms, thick ones with neon green caps that added to the ruddy hues in an unseasonably merry marriage. The light glimmered on the various odds and ends in the attic. A miniature retro gas pump, a tattered minnow net with mismatched weights, a busted radio headset, and— Wait, was that half a kidney? No, just ignore Newport. It's not either of yours, and one man's organ is another man's hors d'oeuvre. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, what's this? Dawson showed me a cowbell missing its hammer, rusted with age, with 2 tiny F's etched carefully on the lip. "Oh, that belonged to my old steer, French Fry. He's been dead for a while now. My dad left us, and a few days later he just dropped like a stone out in the pasture. That cow loved my dad like he was his own father. Guess he couldn't take the loss." Dawson gave the bell a few pitiful shakes, but it gave off little more than flakes of rust. "That's so sad." He paused. "Hey, if it's personal you can tell me to shut up, but what happened with your dad?" The truth was, I didn't really know. Even when he'd sent me the lighter, there were apologies. There was a check, but there were no explanations. "It's not too personal, but I don't think I can give you a satisfying answer like, oh, he cheated and my mom told him to hit the bricks, or he ran off to join the circus. I don't know why he left. I only know that it wasn't mine or my mother's fault because that's what he told me when I heard from him last. There was a letter, but my mom never let me read it, and I don't know where it is now. I don't know where he is now." "Oh, that's— wow." I wished I could cry about it, but the tears didn't come. I just stared at the cowbell, feeling over the notches and grooves when Dawson offered it to me. Telling him lifted a weight off my shoulders, but the sadness never diminished. Usually if a cow or pig died like that, we'd use the meat, but my mom insisted we bury him. She dug his grave herself. It's out in the pasture. Dawson looked past me, clutching the bell tighter in his calloused hands. Instead of apologies I didn't need or more questions I didn't want to answer, he gave me a small and sorrowful smile. "Hey, when this is all over, we should take his bell to him. I think he'd like to have it back." I nodded, and he stuffed it into my front overall pocket. I brushed my fingers over the indent and felt better than any other consoling he could have given me. After wading through to the deepest reaches of the attic like something had hidden it from us, I found the witch bells. My mom wasn't a witch, but several of my distant ancestors had been, casting spells and dancing around a bonfire late into the night while their farmer husbands slept. The bells were an heirloom. I could remember them jingling on our front door when I was a lot smaller. I held the wreath at the end, silver and copper bells tinkling against each other and the smell of dried herbs filling my nose. These have been in my family for generations. They're supposed to keep evil spirits away. I probably should have remembered them by now, but I try not to think about my mother that often if I'm being honest. I knew he wanted to know but didn't want to ask. He respected me too much. But I told him anyway. She loved my dad. I know she did. She loved him so much. I think when he left she got this crack in her, and it just kept getting wider and wider until it split open completely. One night when I was 14, I think it was August, I watched from my window as she walked out onto the porch, stripped down to nothing, and ran off down our dirt road. I waited and waited, but she never came back. Eventually I stopped waiting. I never saw her again. Dawson grimaced. I took a deep breath, happy to have it all off my chest. So glad to say it all out loud to someone, even if that made the years-old ache feel fresh. You really have lost everyone, haven't you? The regret showed on his face the second he said it, but I wasn't upset. I'd long since accepted it as fact, even if it still stung occasionally. Yeah, it's been hard here alone, but until now I've managed. Just know that's the risk you're taking being around me. I'm probably cursed or something. He shook his head and did his best to turn the grimace into a smile. Well, that's a risk I'm willing to take. But as far as the other stuff, I want you to know that I get it. Well, I get it a little. I'd say I wish I got it more, but I think that's fucked up to say. My sister died. Dawson let the explosion from that bomb settle into the dust before he spoke again. That sounds worse than it is. My big sister died before I was born. My mom had a lot of issues having a kid before me, and she was the first baby to make it to term. When she finally came out, she lived for 9.5 minutes. No, Dawson, that sounds exactly as bad as it is. You didn't even get a chance to know her. I can't imagine how that was for your mom. I'm sure you've heard it before, but I'm sorry. Dawson winced and nodded. It's all right. And yeah, okay, it was definitely bad. My mom doesn't really talk about that time in her life. She just reminds me that I'm her rainbow baby every other day. I don't mind it. It feels nice to be someone's hope. Other than that, my uncle disappeared. But that happened before my parents even met. Sorry I didn't bring it up before, but I don't like to think about it much. That sibling I missed. His words struck something in my brain, like blue neon running through coils of tempered glass. That sibling I missed. If I squinted hard enough, I was sure I'd be able to see it. The basket for fruit, withered with age and denial. I couldn't eat blackberries anymore. They tasted like blood. There was something more I wanted to tell Dawson, something that hid in the back corner of my mind, just like that basket. But the words wouldn't come, and then the moment was lost. That wasn't the fault of any awkwardness, though. It was because I screamed. Herbivore teeth dug into the meat of my leg, struck against rocks and gnawed against bones to sharpen their linear edges. It had followed us up here. My blood dribbled down the white jawbone, its patchy neck winding away into the darkness like a sun-scorched garden hose. I felt something pull painfully under my skin as the rot began to tug. Dawson's face went quickly from confusion to rage, and he grabbed the nearest thing to use as a weapon. The rot wasn't very pleased when Dawson threw the book at it, but it didn't react with hissing and screeching like your average demon would when hit with a Bible explicitly made for God's little princesses, as the cover proclaimed. Its jaw clamped harder on my ankle, and I cried out again. Dawson turned for only a second, making a desperate grab for the baseball bat only just out of reach, and that was all it took. It yanked my feet out from underneath me with all the power of a semi-truck, and my nails dug fruitlessly into old wood as it dragged me toward the attic hatch. Newport! Hold on, I'm coming! The last thing I saw before I was pulled from the attic was Dawson tripping over a loose coil of cow neck and crashing into a tower of boxes like a meat-filled bowling ball. Whether he wanted to or not, I knew there would be no saving my life this time unless I did it myself. As it pulled me into the hallway, its disgusting body snapped into place and slithered right along after it. I gripped tight onto anything I could, but all I got for my trouble was bloody fingers and split nails. The hold it had on my ankle went down to the bone, and I was lucky it hadn't split in two. I thought briefly of the man who cut his own arm off to free himself from under a boulder, of coyotes chewing their legs off to escape traps. Even if I could have managed that, there just wasn't any time. Backward down the stairs I went, the cowbell clunking hollowly against them. My teeth rattled and cut into my lip as I tried to flip onto my back and failed. "Why won't you just leave us alone? We never did anything to you." It hissed at me through tight teeth. "The rot comes for yo all in the end." When we reached the bottom, I clung to the banister, holding on with everything I had left in me. The rot groaned in irritation, blasting pain up my leg with each impatient tug, like I was making it late for monster church or something. Then there was a sound I don't think I or the beast had been expecting to hear. The laughter of a small child, a baby, filled the kitchen. I kept my hold on the banister but looked up to see Aunt Jean standing by the doorway. Her mouth had returned to its empty void state, but more than that, twin blood trails ran out of her dilated eyes. When I say dilated, I mean dilated. If there wasn't the thinnest sliver of white at the edges, I would have thought her entire sclera had turned black. She was the one laughing, tittering to herself in the voice of an infant. The rot, only momentarily puzzled by this display, began trying to get me out the door again. That's when it all changed. Something moved underneath the yellow dress Aunt Jean wore, alive and writhing. I could hear the creaks and snaps as old lady joints shifted and broke. The rot responded in kind, returning to the centipede state I'd seen in the forest cornfield. If Aunt Jean had spoken then, I would have imagined her saying something like, "Close your eyes, chickadee. I'd hate for you to see me in such a state." So that's what I did. For good measure, I heard the light bulb above us burst, and the kitchen was plunged into the near darkness of twilight. The next few moments were blurry and dark, carried only by the few times my eyes slipped open. I was thrown around in the iron grip of the rot as I listened to tearing flesh and the echoing war cry of 1,000 different voices. I caught glances of a rib cage, open and fanned out like the wings of an avenging angel, and of a hanging mouth full of angler-sharp teeth. I couldn't discern which warring party they belonged to, but I hoped Aunt Jean was winning. Eventually, all the frantic motion stopped. I opened my eyes and saw what I had been dreading. There was a new crack in my wall, plaster and drywall rising up from the middle like desert dirt, and beneath it was Aunt Jean. Her dress was in tatters, and she was as soaked in blood as the ground the day I met her. A thin layer of dust powdered across her curled-in body. She was breathing, if only just. I screamed again, this time in rage. The rot's skull was now wholly stripped of meat save for its remaining eye, long slashes running down its neck where fur and necrotic skin had been ripped away by the claws of a protective and inhuman ant. "You'll pay for this. You'll pay for this. You'll pay for this." It was all I could say, a broken record with no end. I bashed at it with the hollow cowbell, my only weapon. Its body became rigid again, kicking open the front door with hooves as strong as a piledriver. I screamed and kicked as we left the porch, determined that I, at the very least, wasn't going to make an easy meal. The last rays of the sun had drowned in the darkness, and the only light left was the ember of the porch light, quickly growing distant. That and the eye shine off the pigman standing in the field. Well, standing wasn't the right word. He was rocking back and forth on his heels, making all sorts of noises. I wouldn't have been surprised if the fucker was enjoying watching me get cow-napped. I could hear Dawson crying out my name from the house, and the pulling got faster. He wasn't going to make it in time. He'd race out here only to find my husk of a corpse if he even found me. The cornrows we passed were dry and dying, a bitter reminder of my failure at the worst possible time. I dug my bare, unbitten foot into the dirt, but it did nothing to stop it. Somehow I suddenly knew that it was dragging me to the last field where my property ended, and that's where I would die. I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. I wouldn't even get a final cigarette. At the thought of a cigarette, an idea bloomed in my head, like a forest fire devouring a match factory. I remembered how the shadows had shied away from the porch light. I remember stories told to me when I was no taller than a half-stalk of corn, about beasts that turned to stone when the sun came up and red-eyed, withered giants that feared the wave of a torch. Maybe the rot didn't fear the light, but all creatures of the dark yield to fire. I felt around in my pocket as my chin was scraped bloody against the hard brown dirt. My fingers closed around the blocky case of the lighter, and I pulled it out, praying that I'd been a diligent son and refilled it with lighter fluid before I went into my porch fugue. I tore a dry stalk free and held it close as it gave a few pitiful sparks. Once the lighter caught, the corn went up in a roar of flame and a mini cloud of dark smoke. "Why won't you die? Die! Just die already!" I swung the stalk at the rot, and it caught out in surprise and rage. An actual and very angry call of a crow. I struck a second time with all the fervor of a major league mercenary, and this time it connected. Flames licked at the bone, and the hair remaining on its neck went up in stinking flames. It finally released my ankle, which made the pain 10 times worse. With one more hit missed by an inch, it fled into the field, disappearing into a blotch of mold, then nothing at all. "Come back here! Come back, you fucking coward!" I stood there screeching into the night until the adrenaline wore off and I collapsed from my injured ankle. The only other sound was the shush of ghostly wind in the trees, Dawson's heavy footsteps as he ran toward me, and the crackle of the burning stalk still in my hand. When Dawson reached me, he stomped out the blackened cob and picked me up like always, running back for the house as fast as he could with a limp that I now matched. "Fuck, I thought you were done for. I hate to say it, but I really thought that it would drag you away and I'd never see you again." "Gee, thanks. Shows how much faith you have in me." I was halfway just giving him shit, but he shook his head adamantly. No, I didn't mean it like that. I was just scared for you is all. So crazy, pants-pissingly scared. But look, you did it. You saved your own life all by yourself." A monolithic realization crashed down on me at once, and the tears threatening to spill finally made it past my eyelids. My chest shook and I shivered as I held out my lighter. I knew the kind of friend Dawson was. I knew he'd found my lighter where I'd left it on my nightstand, and shoved it into the pocket of the clothes I'd put on, figuring I'd probably want to smoke sooner rather than later. Dawson thought about even the smallest things. And by extension, I would have lost the lighter itself long ago if he hadn't brought it to me that one fateful afternoon. Dawson had saved my life yet again, without even trying. He seemed to realize it at the same time I did. Oh, silly me. I guess Thank you. By the look on his face, he'd expected me to admonish him like I'd done before. But I couldn't bring myself to, and I didn't want to anyway. You didn't have to bring me back this lighter. You didn't have to do any of the things you've done. You could have jumped off this crazy train wreck as soon as the rot got serious, but you stayed. I can't thank you enough. I know I act like you annoy me, and I probably still will a little. But the truth is, if you left right now, I think I'd die. And not just because of the killer munch I've got on my ankle. Dawson let me down, staring at me for a long second. His lower lip trembled, and then he pulled me into another hug. It wasn't like others before it, weak-armed and trembling as he sniffled into my hair. Whether we stood there for minutes or for centuries, it all felt the same. We both jumped like spooked rabbits when we heard a long creak the stairs. I think we both expected another assault from the rot, but instead we saw a much friendlier face. Aunt Jean slowly descended the stairs, not as broken as she had been, but with slight mottles of bruises and the light stain of blood across her pale skin. She wore little more than a night slip and a pair of socks. God, she was okay. Aunt Jean, I thought you were a goner. I rushed over to her as fast as I could given the state of my leg, and for the first time I threw my arms around her small frame. The hug was long overdue and just as motherly as I expected, and I closed my sore eyes as she smoothed my hair back with a wrinkled hand. In a voice that sounded like 1,000 buzzing cicadas and the crack of dry wood, her true voice if she had one, she spoke a single word to me. Chickadee. I held on to her and cried some more as if I hadn't cried enough that night. My leg was really starting to hurt, a burning sting that made goosebumps creep up my arms and had me craving to dig my hands into my stomach and physically force away the nausea. Promise me you won't get yourself hurt like that again. I knew it was a promise she wouldn't be able to keep, but I wanted her to tell me so anyway. She nodded, gently guiding me to the table where Dawson was opening a first aid kit. The second I sat down, he lifted my leg and examined the bite wound. He looked it over for a long time, saying nothing. When he did speak, his voice was quiet. This bite is nasty, Newport. I think it's already starting to get infected. I'm taking you to the hospital tomorrow. I tried to object, but the pain shut me up. Dawson gave me the same treatment I'd given him, cleaning and bandaging the wound. He packed the gauze in extra tight, making sure not even a trickle of free-running blood was left. By the time he was done, the moon hung fat and yellow just out the window. My coffee machine grumbled to life as Aunt Joan fiddled with it. It's not done with us. All of this, and it's still not fucking done with us. I pulled my arms around myself and shivered. It was that time of year when the nights rarely got below 70 degrees, but a chill was quickly invading my body. I know, I realize that, but you're more important. Right now we need to rest and regroup. Aunt Jean, I sincerely hope that's decaf. She smiled a knowing smile and I raised an eyebrow. You must have pulled that out of a coffee pocket dimension because this house has never seen a single bean of decaf since I've been living here. Dawson brought the mugs over once they were full. I wrapped my hands around the mug and hovered my face over the steamy warmth of it. It felt like someone stuck my feet into an icebox. Maybe we should cut our losses and go live in the coffee pocket dimension. As tempting as that sounds, I doubt it would be animal-friendly. I took a long sip as Dawson lit one of the emergency candles I kept in the junk drawer. The kitchen filled with flickering orange light casting funhouse shadows across the walls. Fever chills ran up and down my arms and legs, no matter how much coffee I drank. I unconsciously moved closer to the candle flame, soaking up the faint shimmer of heat it left across my face. Somewhere in the distance I heard the tinkling of bells. I tried to think of witches, pale women dancing naked in the light of roaring flames and roasting alive in that same blaze. I tried to think of how this coffee tasted like dirt water. I tried to think of how the candlelight lashed across Dawson's dark skin and glowed in his swampy eyes. but I couldn't think about any of it, because I was goddamn freezing. I'm going to build a bonfire. Dawson and Aunt Jean turned from where they were looking out the window, eyes now fixed on me and filled with worry. It pissed me off. Hadn't they ever been cold before? It wasn't like I was dying. I wasn't dying. Are you sure that's a good idea? The ground is kinda dry, and I wouldn't want us to start a... Yes, I'm sure. I'm colder than a witch's tit in a brass bra, and that thing is scared of fire. We'll gather all the animals up, and if we stay near it, maybe we can last the night. We just need to make it to daylight. We've got to make it to daylight. My teeth chattered as I talked, and when I was done, I had to grit my teeth hard to stop them. Newport, I don't know. I grabbed the candle by the end as wax began dripping onto my fingers. It burned a little, but I didn't care. It felt good. Are you going to help me or not? The two of them exchanged a glance before Dawson nodded. Of course I'll help you, Newport. As long as you promise to sit down and get some rest after. I threw open the front door and looked out into the yard. I knew the perfect spot. Dawson, if I can get warm, I'll dance an Irish jig for you if you want. Bad ankle and all. I walked around to the coop as Dawson grabbed Alice. My feathery sentinel stood right at the door for me if she'd been expecting me. She was the only chicken awake. Beelzebub stayed perched on my shoulder as Dawson grabbed wood from the stacks I kept just outside the forest. Dark shapes swayed and contorted just beyond the edge of it, in and out of the tree rows, just subtle enough to feel like it was all in your head. The moon hadn't made far enough into the sky, making the pines look as though they stretched upward forever. Out there in the dark, there was a lone whistle. Something about that 2-mile stretch of woods wasn't right. Not evil, just not right. I turned away from them and how they made me feel, gathering a meager load of wood in my weak arms. I stumbled, and Dawson made me lean against him. We dumped the wood on the spot where 7 years ago, my mom had hesitated a moment before leaving me forever. Dawson poured the gas, and when I struck the match, it felt like burning away the memory of her thin, sickly body. Newport, when we make it out of this, I'm going to make you the best breakfast you've ever had. I appreciated his use of when and not if, even if I wasn't that confident in it. As the gas-soaked wood caught with a whoosh and the flames climbed high into the sky, I swore I could smell meat. Not rotten meat or meat raw with blood, but the warm aroma of bacon. It did little to rid me of the invasive chill, but it was nice anyway. I wanted to say something stupid. I wanted to tell him to be careful not to get into the updog, or that I wanted a steak omelet and the rot stuffed head on my desk by 5 o'clock this evening. I wanted to say anything that didn't make it feel as final as it did. Instead, I looked up at him from where I'd laid on the ground. The deep green of his eyes shone in the bonfire. It'll be a great one, I whispered, and he smiled even though the worry didn't leave his face. Then I closed my eyes and let the world turn orange. There's a house at the end of the world. Of course the house doesn't know the world has ended. It doesn't know that everyone it knew, dare say it loved, is dead. It only knows what it's done, what it's been programmed to do for as long as it can remember. So it keeps on, caring for people who aren't there and will never be there again. And then suddenly, there is something there, wandering in from the nuclear wasteland, man's best friend, loyal to a fault. The front door opens and lets in the dog, riddled with radiation sickness. He runs frantically around the house, barking crazed and searching for what is now less than ghosts, but eventually the silence settles into his deteriorating bones. The story's a classic one, and the ending doesn't change. The fire comes for us all eventually. But just this once, it doesn't have to. The cameras, like the eyes of angels, see the sorry state of the animal, and the kitchen door swishes open. There is water, there is food, and there is balm for his open wounds, all carried by the hands of diligent little mice. The fire of madness fades from his green eyes and is replaced with a flicker of hope. And the voice from the kitchen with new purpose simply says, "Good boy." The dog may not survive the coming days. The house may be rubble by dawn, but there is here and now. There are soft rains. The dog can sleep in peace, laid by the warmth of the stove, and the house is empty and alone no longer. And that's enough. That warmth of the stove radiating in once hollow bones becomes the heat of the bonfire as my eyes shoot open. I couldn't tell how long I was out, but it must have been a while. Long enough that Dawson gathered the animals out from the barn and corralled them near the flames, far enough to be safe but close enough to be protected by them. Hephaestus stood right beside Dawson, and he had his arm thrown around his broad neck. I was relieved to see that he was okay. The last time I'd seen him was as a main course. You know, you're really not so bad, old guy. You want an apple? I bet you do, you grumpy ass. Hephaestus snuffled, then answered him in a terse voice. Actually, I'd rather have some sort of root vegetable. Carrot, potato, perhaps a parsnip. I grow tired of your fruits. My kingdom for a sugar cube. I wish I'd known sooner that my horse could talk. Dawson pulled an apple from his pocket and split it in half with his bare hands, offering one to Hephaestus, who took it immediately. Yeah, that's what I thought, Grumpy Pants. The world began to spin underneath my feet. I was covered in sweat, but at least I wasn't cold anymore. A low groan rose out of my throat as I pitched forward. I was close enough to the fire to singe my hair a little when Dawson caught me. My leg wasn't hurting anymore, but that didn't exactly make me feel better because everything else was. Whoa, you better sit back down, buddy. I don't want this bonfire turning into a funeral pyre. You don't look so good, Newport, Hephaestus said, staring at me with his wide brown eyes. Yeah? What do you know? You're just a fucking horse. Dawson helped me stand up, his face twisting into a look of concern. Newport, you're like wet all over. Have you been sweating that bad? You look really pale. Are you okay? I meant to answer him, but something stole the words right out of my mouth. I could see her in the fire. My mother smiled at me, holding out a glass filled with cold milk. Only then did I realize just how long it had been since I drank something. She was just as beautiful as the day she left, in that special way only moms are, smiling sweetly as she offered me the cup. I reached out and took the glass, not thinking about the burns as flames licked around my fingers. Dawson was saying something, but I couldn't understand it. The second I tilted it to my lips, the milk turned into something else. I spit out clumps of sand and tiny ant bodies, grit crunching between my teeth and making my mouth drier than ever. That shit was like an ant farm in a glass. I needed water. I was so thirsty. I shoved Dawson away from me with all the force I had, which I found wasn't much, then made a mad dash for the one place I knew there would be water. My feet felt like fleshy lead as I charged across the yard, becoming top-heavy the last few steps, so it was more like falling. Newport, what the hell are you doing? My fingernails dug into the crumbling brick as I tried to heave myself over the side. There was nothing but inky darkness within, but I knew at the bottom was endless cold water. I had to get down there. My middle tilted over the side, and suddenly the sky was underneath me. Blood rushed to my head, but I didn't take the plunge. Then my mind went white. Pain. Blinding hot pain. It left room for nothing else in my head. Then I was moving. Yanked out onto the grass, all I could do was scream and flail. It melded with the howl coming from deep in the well. Anna's indignation at my intrusion. Dawson was yelling now, but it might as well have been a caveman's whispering. It was far away, and it sure didn't make sense. Eventually, the tinnitus faded enough to hear a single sentence. We need to get you to the hospital now. The world melted into colors as Dawson mercifully let go of my feet and dragged me under the armpits up the porch and into the house. I tried to tell him that I was fine and my insurance would definitely not pay for whatever this was, especially considering that I didn't have any. But all that came out was, Cold fingers began to roll up the leg of my overalls, and then I heard Dawson gasp. I did my best to focus on where he was looking. It was a mess of black and red and purple and green. Oh, okay, that's... Newport, how attached are you to your leg? Since birth, don't plan to change that, I said through gritted teeth as my eyes fought against me. Finally, I saw it. My leg had been consumed by patches of mold and even mushrooms up to my thigh. Bile rose in my throat. Pain rolled up from my lower half and banged around in my skull that was suddenly too small. Newport, it's gonna kill you. I don't think we even have time to get to the hospital. I can see it spreading. I tried to get out of the chair he'd put me in but fell back immediately. I'm gonna have to conscientiously object to that. He grabbed a length of butcher's twine from the pantry and a bottle of whiskey. If he was dead set on whatever was about to happen, we were both going to need more than one bottle. As I watched him eyeing the butcher block, I remembered something. Like we were co-leasing the same hive mind, I heard him speak up behind me. This is probably the worst time ever to ask, but what's this salt for? I craned my neck around enough to see the large bag of black salt, still sitting on my counter, right where I knew it would be. I don't know. The landlady gave it to me. I'd already explained her to him as much as he could, and he gave me every explanation under the sun from a being from a higher plane to 18, specifically 18 rats in a trench coat. All I told him was that some answers aren't meant for us. He came over and began to tie the butcher's twine around my leg, just above where the black started. I wanted to pull it off, but my fingers felt like disobedient worms. Why would she just bring you that much salt? I don't know, but before I could finish my answer, there was a loud sound that made both of us jump. It was the radio, the one in the corner of the kitchen that I thought was long dead, roaring to life. Aunt Jean stood in front of it, fiddling with a knob before starting a disjointed old lady dance, tapping her toes and swinging her hips like she was at the sock hop or something. Everything else was momentarily forgotten. "Get it, Jeannie," Dawson said, cracking a laugh despite the fact that his hands were still shaking. My foggy brain somehow recognized the song she was jamming to. Will it go round in circles? Will it fly high like a bird up in the sky? I remember this song. My dad used to play it, and I thought it said, "Will he go round in circles? Will he fly high like a bird up in the sky?" I told my dad someone should get Willie down from there, and he laughed and laughed and laughed. Dawson looked at me like I just told him his mama danced in wooden shoes. "Wait, it doesn't say Willie go round in circles?" I giggled, and Aunt Jean shot us both a look. It was sharp like a school teacher. "Pay attention, chickadees," I could practically hear her say. She started to do a shuffling circular dance similar to the Egyptian walk. Her bottom hand waved around and her top one did a weird snap, trading places as she went. "You really got the moves, don't you, Aunt Jane?" Same look. Were we missing something? All at once she stopped dancing and walked over to the ancient radio. I watched her disturb the dust thick on the top of the radio, running a bony finger through in a large circle. In the circle she made a crude drawing of a house. It hit me harder than a double-dipped Deus Ex Machina. "On the house, the note the landlady gave me with the salt. She wants us to make salt circles." Aunt Jean grinned a grin that stretched all the way to her ears. A nice little number with an incredible amount of teeth. I like to call her 52 card smile. Then she snapped her fingers like the crack of a gunshot. Dawson looked at me. "Your leg." I grabbed onto the chair as hard as I could and forced myself to my foot, letting the infected one hang beneath me. This lame horse wasn't going down without a fight. "We need allies. I'll put out the bonfire and get us reinforcements. You take the animals back and that weird metal and leather thing up in the loft. I know you've seen it because you were squatting in there, weirdo. Bring it to me. And a tarp." Dawson looked like he really wanted to say no, but he nodded. "Aunt Jean, you're our lookout." She didn't give any noticeable response, but I swear I saw her nose twitch. With that, Dawson wrapped one arm around my waist and the other around the bag of black salt, and out we went. "Are you sure you don't need my help?" I grabbed his hand right after he sat me down, next to where the fire was already burning a little low. The animals had been put back in their rightful places while we were gone. I would have been worried that they were stolen, but I could hear Hef snoring from here. I assumed it was one of the likely culprits, an old lady or a goddess. "You are helping me, but if I can't do it all myself, you can't either. Now go." Dawson sighed, saluted, and ran off toward the barn. I grabbed the heavy bucket of water Dawson had saved to put out the fire, and dragged it as close as possible before tipping it. The flames died unceremoniously. Somewhere in the distance I heard hooves. I'd given Alice to Dawson, so if I got ambushed, I was fucked 7 ways to Sunday. I steeled myself and fell onto my stomach, Army crawling over toward my battalion. As I dug my elbows hard into the dirt, the chickens watched on in amused indifference. All except for Beelzebub, who I assumed Dawson put back in the coop at some point. She was staring at me with hard eyes wide beyond her chickeny years. She knew something was coming and she was ready for it. I opened the hatch and bees corralled her flock out, just as Dawson brought me the supplies. I sat down and without a word began to work. "Back when I was younger, when it was just me," I told him. Words that felt weird in my mouth, but right. I got sick kind of easy, like barely able to leave the house sick. During that first summer, the lawn got really bad, so I jerry-rigged this harness up. It's got a metal shield at the back and a seed can in the front. With this, I trained the chickens to pull the lawnmower, with Bee's help. Turns out they're a lot stronger than most chickens. A little faster, too. They'd beat even you in a foot race. Dawson laughed a little and helped me fix the tarp to the back. "We need all the head start we can get. I have a feeling that thing won't be expecting a parade of chickens making salt circles for us. Maybe we can get the jump." I finished hooking them up and filled the can in front with seed as Dawson filled the tarp in the back with salt. Then, with a cry of "go," they were off. It was Christmas in July, and bees was my Rudolph. Chickens are a lot smarter than most people would like to believe, and most animals can be taught at least a few commands with the proper positive reinforcement. I'd done the same with Beelzebub when I first got her, first for fun, then I realized it had more practical use. Never say you can't teach an old chicken new tricks. She seemed to learn something new every day. Bees was the best chicken in the entire world in my family when no one else had been around. Left, hard left. Bees banked hard left and her flock charged down the dirt road, pecking at the seed trail as they went. Dawson and I ran after. The moon had gone from yellow to a sickly milk white, and the shadows grew to giants. I could hear the rattle of bone and the click-clack of teeth in the near distance, but I didn't think about failing. Failing wasn't an option. Right! The chickens swung the corner on the first cornfield several strides ahead of us, leaving a thick, unbroken trail of black salt behind. When my leg gave out, which didn't take long, Dawson hefted me onto his back. We moved as a unit, all in singular purpose. Left again! Left! They were far ahead of us now, but still dutifully followed the guidance from my hoarse voice. By now I could hear the hoofbeats just a few feet behind us. My skin prickled. Don't look back, I told Dawson. Just keep running. He did just that. The ground beneath us was becoming slick with decay, but he kept his footing. Right. Another right. We ran them around the 4 large fields on either side of my road, and then the single one in spitting distance of the front porch. The pigman stood there, silent as a statue. His face was darker than usual, and I saw muddy-colored teeth digging into his loose bottom lip. He was mad. Suck it, asshole. You're rooting for the loser. He let out one loud, sustained squeal like a stressed-out cat. I spit at him as Dawson followed the chickens toward the barn. Bees already knew where to go, and Dawson hadn't even broken a sweat. How are you not tired? He shrugged. I run pretty much every morning. I always pass by your road. It was such a mundane thing, and yet it was mind-boggling to me. He'd been running past the mouth of my driveway for who knows how long, and we'd never crossed paths until now. I wondered what would have happened if we met sooner. Didn't like the answer, and didn't think about it anymore. Stop in for breakfast next time, dickface. Dawson held onto my good leg as we rounded the corner of the barn hard, then ground to a terrified halt. There it was, standing only a stone's throw away. More meat had peeled away from its bones like old wallpaper, exposing broken knees and yellow shoulder blades. We didn't move an inch, neither did it. We'd come this far, and I felt an odd sense of hesitation on its part. As far as Mexican standoffs go, this was a pretty weird one. Then, all of a sudden, it shuddered once and collapsed into a pile of wet flesh and brittle bone. We stood there for a minute, 3, 5, 8. Nothing stirred, save for what looked like a few necrotic twitches. I could hear the faint whines of a fly or two up way past their bedtime. Dawson set me down on the ground, and I kept my eyes on what I hoped was a corpse as he turned to me. Give me your lighter. This has to end now. We need to burn the body. Something wasn't right about this, but I knew we wouldn't get any other opportunities. I pulled the Zippo from my pocket and placed it in his hand. Be careful. Light the tail first. Dawson nodded, gave me a brief smile, then turned around and cautiously approached the body. Then he stopped, and his skin went pale. I braced for whatever horror was to come. Then he held a hand to his nose. God, this thing smells awful. With one quick flick, he sparked the lighter and threw it onto the mangy tail. The fireball that erupted nearly clipped Dawson, and he staggered back with singed hair. It felt like the sky got just a little brighter above us, the stars twinkling a little more. He smiled at me, a softer one, and I just wanted to get up off the hard dirt and run over to him. I wanted to wrap him in the biggest hug ever, and go cook the biggest breakfast known to man and do everything with him forever for the rest of my life. That was easy. You sound like the Staples button. It was the first thing that came to my mind, and Dawson looked at me like I'd just turned purple. But then he laughed. He laughed, and I laughed, and he walked over and scooped me up from the ground and told me if I didn't have any bacon in the house after all of this, he was going to apply to be the rot's replacement. I laughed again and told him that for my best friend I had anything. Except we didn't get that far. Dawson was half the distance over to me when it happened. Something long and gray shot out from the dry grass, wrapping tight around his ankle like a pissed-off octopus. I could see his skin straining against the grip. He opened his mouth. but whatever he had to say was lost in a long scream as he shot upward 15 feet. I hadn't read this twisted version of Jack and the Beanstalk, but it was playing out in front of me. "Dawson," he wobbled and tilted, somehow remaining upright on one foot like a tightrope walker. I couldn't decide which was worse, that the rot might have not been dealt with after all, or that this was an entirely new threat to deal with. A stream of what the fucks escaped me like cloudy breath on a winter's night. "Dawson, dude, I'm gonna get you down. Just hang on." He tugged at the thing wrapped around his ankle to no avail. I knew he had strong hands, but was not letting him go that easy. "Not much else I can do." As I forced myself up to my feet, ignoring the agony, a large portion of skin at the base of the weird evil pillar ballooned out into a greasy pustule. Just as I got within smelling range, it burst open to nauseating effect, missing me by inches. But the smell wasn't nearly as bad as seeing 4 bovine legs and the same tatty tail that Dawson burned only a few moments ago. It hadn't died at all. It had played us for fools, and we fell for it. It wasn't totally the same, though. Where swaths of skin were once missing, it had been replaced with dry, dead corn husks. They were woven into the flesh like a shitty patchwork doll. I threw myself headlong toward it, slamming all my weight into the slimy newborn body. It shuddered for a moment before bucking forward, sending me tumbling onto my ass. I got myself up again. I knew I was probably doing irreversible damage to my leg, but I didn't care. My focus was only on Dawson and on ending this moldy fuck once and for all. I charged again, fully intending to leap at the last second and climb up to Dawson. At the very least, I could cushion his fall. But everything stopped when a sharp hoof collided with the side of my face. Dawson's "holy fuck" sounded like an echo up from an oceanic trench. The hit was hard enough to make me forget who I was and what the sky looked like for a second. I crash-landed into the dirt, my teeth rattling as I made contact. Pain exploded across my cheek and jaw, hot blood trickling into my mouth from where the sharp edge had split the skin open. It was going to make one pisser of a scar, that was for sure. "Newport, get back to the house. I can get free on my own." He was a bad liar, and we both knew it. "Not a chance, asshole." As I prepared to make another run, something froze me in my tracks. More boils were growing all over the stalk that held Dawson, spreading and widening like a sci-fi plague. The first one to burst was all over me, covering me in a thick gloss of cat vomit gray. I just stood there for a second, too stunned to do anything. Then I saw red. This fucking rotted-ass cow thing had come onto my land, infected my crops, spooked my animals, and made several attempts at both I and Dawson's lives. Popping a pimple on me, that was the last straw. Dawson was suddenly dropped, and the whole world tilted on its axis as he fell. I almost wish he'd hit the ground, because as bad as it would have been, it was nothing compared to how he was caught. The root snapped forward, grabbed him by the neck, and forced open his mouth. Then, it threaded around the back of his head and into his mouth, putting slow pressure on his jaw. Long necks with heads snaked out of the burst boils, shaking their skulls and laughing. "All right, you beefaroni bitch, this ends now." Dawson tried to speak, his legs dangling wildly, but all that came out was garbled pleas and an awful cracking sound. I shoved my hand in my pocket and pulled out my Hail Mary, a handful of black salt. I was already running as I shoved it in my mouth, and this time I ducked the hoof. I didn't think, I just bit down. My mouth watered with saline taste, and dry cow hair clogged my nose. I could feel the grains between my teeth and clinging to my tongue like bits of salty apple. I could hear the beast crying in rage and pain, but I didn't stop. Musty blood ran down my chin like fruit juice. I didn't stop biting until I felt Dawson pulling me away, herding me toward the house. The rot had fallen like a mighty oak, all 9 of its necks spread out like withered branches. It looked like moldy Swiss cheese. "Are you okay? Please be okay. Can't lose you." I wanted to shout it, but the exhaustion kept it to little more than a mumble. I gripped onto his shirt and forced all that was left in my body into working my eyes. His face swam in and out of focus, bruised and bloody, but definitely alive. I'm fine, I promise, I'm okay, we're okay." Dawson didn't have anything worse than a bigger limp and a stream of blood leaking from somewhere in his mouth. I clung to him as he pulled me onto the porch. If I hadn't killed that thing once and for all, we were safe here in the circle. There were 1,000,001 things that needed to be done, chief among them taking care of Dawson's injuries. But my body was shutting down. My leg felt numb and cold, like it wasn't a part of me anymore. And my fever was more than likely sitting at a steady 104. The last thing I heard before going under was, "Dude, I think I lost a molar." Footsteps. My ears strained against the lifting fog to hear them. As my crusted eyes opened, I could see dimming stars and the faint light in the east of approaching dawn. The footsteps were heavy and frantic, like firemen saving children from an inferno, but with far less grace. They stumbled over one another. I tried to get up, but my body was locked in place. I could smell smoke and feel ash crumbling beneath my fingertips. I'd been moved to the graveyard of the night's bonfire. Little wisps of gray still rose from the ashes beneath me, but I couldn't feel any heat. Everything felt hazy and unclear, like I was dreaming. And maybe I was. I don't think I'll ever know for sure. When the slow thud of hooves grew out of the distance, I couldn't do anything other than lay there and wilt inside. After everything, it still wasn't over? Was I going to have to shoplift a nuclear warhead or something? As the rot came into my line of sight, which was pretty much right above my head, it leaned down uncomfortably close. Its heavy, sick breath smelled like someone put dirty dishwater in a 10-year time capsule. All along its mandible and on the outer edge of its eye socket were small notches, marks left by the ferocious bite of a wild animal. Or if you wanted to get technical, my teeth. "Go away," was all I said. It was all I wanted. "I will have what I want. Nothing I have belongs to you. It's all mine. You don't belong here. You're a thief and a vandal, and you're trying really hard to be a murderer. But you're not getting that promotion." Unlike the previous interactions, its voice was annoyingly even and calm. "Everything belongs to me. I will come another day. I will come for all eventually." I furrowed my eyebrows and gave it the hardest look I could. The look my dad gave to all the strangers who would give him funny looks going into town. Those moments when he became a wall. I could be a wall too. Fuck you. I don't care what you are or what you think is rightfully yours. As long as you dare to darken my doorstep, I'll never stop fighting against you. I want to live. It was the first time I'd said it out loud in a long time, but it was true. Not wanting to die and wanting to live are two different things. And yes, I wanted to live so badly. Maybe not necessarily for myself, but who was keeping score anyway? The rot was quiet for a long time, so long that I didn't expect to speak again. Then it said 3 simple words to me, the last I'd ever hear it speak. "Persist, little worm." Then it turned and slowly trotted away. The sound of it replaced the frantic footsteps receding into the distance until I couldn't hear it anymore. The dawn came slow, quiet, but alive. Birds sang and crickets chirped at the same time. The stars stayed out just a little past their bedtime, even as the sun rose. A cuckoo and a sparrow flew past my vision, chirping in perfect harmony. My eyes closed like lead curtains, and when they opened, I was laying in my bed. Bandages were wrapped thick around me in several places, and my leg was stiff but definitely still attached. "Dawson?" My voice sounded like sandpaper and felt even worse. I was drained, but nowhere near as bad as the night before. The fever had left, but that and everything else was at the back of my mind. I ran downstairs on legs that didn't really want to work right, out through the kitchen door, and into the sunny morning. Dawson stood out in the yard, facing the house as if he'd been waiting for me. Without a second thought, I sprinted over and all but crashed into him. He wrapped his arms around me and I held on tight like I'd shake to pieces any second. "You aren't hurt bad, are you? God, don't ever get cow-napped like that ever again. I don't think I can take it." Dawson took my face in both his huge hands and lined our gazes. "Are you kidding me? You went rabid squirrel on that guy, dude. I've never seen a mouth move that fast, and my dad used to call auctions when I was little. I don't ever have to worry as long as I have you around, Newport." Something tightened in my stomach, but it wasn't the ache of apple-related food poisoning or the creeping dread I'd been constantly in and out of for what felt like ages. No, it was something different, something foreign. So naturally, I pushed it down. Dawson looked away, put his hands down. Whatever had been pulling taut in me suddenly let go. "When we pull out of this hug, which I assume we eventually gotta, don't freak out, okay? I know it looks really bad, but..." I didn't let him finish. I slid out of his grip and right into a goddamn nightmare. Every single field, full of corn a few hours ago, was empty. The only signs that anything had been growing there were a few crumbling brown stalks. The salt circles had been disturbed in several places, bloody footprints marring the spots where they'd been broken. The culprit stood in the field, the sun casting a greasy sheen on his dead skin. Flecks of black salt still stuck to his ankles. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me fall to my knees, though I really wanted to. I just stood there staring at it all. My mind cycled through all the problems this meant in warp speed. No crop, no money, no crop. It's all gone. It's all gone. It's July already. How the fuck am I going to fix this? I buried my head in my hands, tears of rage burning their way out of my eyes. I'm ruined. I felt a hand on my shoulder. Dawson held it in a firm grip, just like he always did. Hey, we can fix this. I won't lie and say it'll be easy. But we can do it together. I'll help you however I can. I laid my hand on top of his for a second and nodded. I had less than zero faith in that plan, not with harvest season just around the corner, but if he was willing to try, so was I. I gently pushed his hand away and started walking through the barren field, stomping across the dry dirt in boots I'd had on for who knows how long at this point. I stopped right in front of the pigman and did something I'd been wanting to for a long time. I gave him a fat fucking middle finger right to his stupid face. He just grinned those ugly teeth at me, and I told him his dad was gay. Nice one, Dawson called out. I would have said thanks or that's rich coming from you. But the words died in my throat as I saw the salt circle protecting the barn had been broken too. In the space of a breath, I was already across the yard and swinging open the ajar barn door. Davy Crockett stood a foot away from me, trembling and thin. His pupils were huge and his horns were lowered, like he was ready to charge. By his side, looking just as scared and twice as pissed, was Sally Ann. She held her orange flank against his shaking body, keeping him on his feet. Husband and wife, a team to the bitter end. The rest of the animals were spooked, but unhurt. He'd stood here ever since the circle had been broken, protecting the rest from the menace that must have walked among them. As soon as he saw me, he collapsed. Davy, what did they do to you? Dawson ran in after as I gathered Davy up into my arms. He was still alive, but barely. Let's load him up in the truck. We can get him to an emergency vet. I shook my head and had him help me lay him down in the stall I kept for situations like this. No, we can't. The nearest emergency livestock vet is almost a 3-hour drive. The landlady, she takes care of things like this. She'll either fix him or take him. I laid a stall blanket over Davy, scratching him behind his ears like he liked. Sally Ann laid right beside him, nudging into his underside. As I stood to go, Davy let out the loudest, most defiant bleat I'd ever heard from an animal. He was letting me know that this wasn't about to bring him down, and I believed him. You tell him, Davy, I said, my voice quiet and choked with emotion. Dawson crouched next to me. I watched him pull something from his pocket and lay it next to Davy's weak form. Upon closer inspection, I realized it was the molar he'd lost in our last stand. For good luck, not that I think he needs it. Sounds like he's got it under control, but just in case. There was so little to laugh about. Everything was crashing down around us, but my God, I did it anyway. I laid down on the dirt floor of the barn and laughed myself stupid, Dawson laughing right along with me. When I couldn't breathe anymore, I finally sat up and wiped my eyes. We both gave Davy a pat, then left the barn, me leaning hard onto Dawson just like Davy had leaned on his wife for all of that horrible night. Halfway to the house, Dawson slowed, squinting out at the field. Hold on, I want to look at something. I stood on my own again as he walked over, but that was just fine by me. I didn't want to look at anything over there. I wanted to turn my back and pretend my fields were still full of near-ripe corn, so that's what I did. Newport, come here, you gotta see this. I wanted to tell him that nothing short of a treasure chest full of gold coins was going to interest me, but I decided to humor him. I met him at the edge of the field, the same one the pigman stood stoically in. He held a withered ear of corn up to his nose, sniffing it like a fine wine. Yeah, this is definitely infected. I rolled my eyes. Rub it in, why don't you? Dawson turned to me, a beyond excited look on his face. No, it's corn smut, Huitlakosh. Before I could tell Dawson that corn smut sounded like the name of a shitty farmer porno, he'd torn off a piece of the gray mold and popped it into his mouth. My stomach lurched. Are you trying to get botulism poisoning now, too? Dawson took a second to chew before answering. This is a delicacy. It's a type of mushroom, kind of like truffles. Try one. He tore off a piece and offered it out to me. It was swollen and gray with spots of sickly blue and black. I stared at it like it was going to grow eyes and look back at me. And this isn't going to kill me? No, but honestly, after all we've seen, there are so many worse ways to die, don't you trust me? I did, so I ate it. It was raw and earthy, with a hint of sweet hiding behind the overall grit of dirt. Not exactly delicacy-worthy, but I could stand to eat another piece. Dawson began gathering up the other ears of mushroom corn. Hey, I still owe you breakfast. Got any tortillas hanging around? A soft breeze began to blow, and if I believed in such things, I would have said it was nudging us toward the house. The tinkling of the witch bells mixed with the sounds of the world around us coming to life. Let's go find out. Soon the kitchen was filling with the smell of melting cheese and cooking corn smut, and Aunt Jean joined us from somewhere upstairs. Beelzebub nestled in the crook of her arm. Two bruised up and traumatized farmers, an old lady who actually wasn't either of those things, and a chicken all about to chow down on some moldy corn quesadillas. Probably the strangest breakfast in history, but I wouldn't have had it any other way. Look what I found, Dawson said, after sitting our plates down on the table. He held out a fat and ripe apple like he'd found a bar of gold. Looks like the universe wants us to have a balanced breakfast. Shame there's only one, though. He offered the apple to me, and I looked it over. It was the third most beautiful piece of fruit I'd ever seen. Then I gripped it hard in my hands, pushed my thumbs in the top, and snapped it in half. Dawson's eyebrows jumped. Think we both need a balanced breakfast after that, don't you? I offered him half, and he took it carefully like it was more than just an apple. And I guess, in a way, it was. Breakfast is on me next time. He nodded, and so did I. Then I took a bite. It tasted like victory. It tasted like relief and the chance to live another day. It tasted sweet and crisp like any good apple should. But it was my apple, and that's what made it special. It was the second best apple that I'd ever had.